Good morning, members, members of Parliament, support staff, visitors of the public in the Tribune, radio listeners, TV viewers, those following via social media, and members of the media. Welcome to this committee meeting of Public Housing, Spatial Planning, Environment, and Infrastructure, number 2, today, Wednesday, January 22nd, 2025. I would like to bid a special welcome to the Minister of Public Housing, Spatial Planning, and Environment and Infrastructure, Mr. Patrice Gomes Jr., and the Minister of Tourism, Economic Affairs, Transport, Telecommunication, Ms. Grisha Helliger Martin, and their respective supporting staff. We have established a quorum of 6 members of the committee. Please stand for a moment of silence. Thank you. I have received a notice of absence from the following members: MP Ludmila De Weaver, MP Viren Kotai, MP Omar Atley. I have received a notice of lateness from the following members: MP Rayan Peterson and MP Ardwell Irian. Notifications. Are there any notifications? MP Duran.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to you, my honorable colleagues, the Honorable Minister of TIAT, Public Housing, Spatial Planning, and the support staff. A special good morning to the people of St. Martin. Mr. Chairman, I just wish to address a recent article published in the newspaper today regarding my tenure as the Minister of CVROMI. First, I must clarify a point of confusion presented in this article. It suggests that as former minister, I did not attend an appeal hearing. For the record, as a standard practice, it is not customary or required for ministers to attend such hearings in person. Hence the reason we have the legal and technical staff that deals with this. This is precisely why ministers have these staff to do such. I believe that this matter deserves clarity, as it is unintentionally implying dereliction of duty, which was definitely not the case. Secondly, Mr. Chairman, the article also claims that there was no opportunity to object to have a hearing regarding the issuance of the permit. This is in direct contradiction of what was mentioned before, and I believe that this needs to be addressed because both claims cannot coexist. On one hand, you can't say that I didn't attend the hearing, and secondly, in the same article saying that a hearing wasn't allowed because it wasn't published in the Gazette. I believe that it suggests also lack of transparency, which I must know that such a narrative has to be placed in a factual perspective because that definitely didn't happen. Another critical point, Minister, is that, Mr. Chairman, is that the ministry's role is currently appealing the proceeding. It has been reported that the Ministry of CVROMI, under the current minister, failed to provide the required documents to the court, which led to delays, which is quite perplexing to me because all the relevant documents and advice was complied during my tenure. Why were these documents not submitted on time? It's not clear to me. Furthermore, why were their ministry representatives unable to respond to court questions? The article quotes, Mr. Chairman, that the government's lawyers saying that he did not have all the information. This raises serious concerns, especially since those documents should be already existent in the ministry. Additionally, and lastly, Mr. Chairman, the article questions the change of purpose in the property in Beacom Hill, claiming that it's exclusively zoned for single-family dwellings. I know that a change of purpose was applied for and, according to my knowledge, also eventually granted. Mr. Chairman, I just want this body to look beyond selective narratives that attempt to cast a negative light upon decisions made during my tenure. Because at the end of the day, based on my recollection, I've never overturned a decision or advice from the Department of Permits. So I just want to clarify that point, and I would like to thank you for your indulgence.
Thank you, MP Duran. Are there any other notifications? Thank you for your notification, MP. The agenda points for this meeting are: number 1, incoming documents; number 2, discussion on the management of beaches and coastline and applicability and scope of the Civil Code 5.26, Beach Policy and Moratoriums, IS 676, 2021-2022, dated 17th of March 2022. This agenda point was requested by MP Wescot-Williams. Agenda point number 3, discussion with the Minister of CVROMI on progress and prioritization of capital expenditure projects IS 298, 2024-2025, dated 19th of November 2024. This agenda point was requested by my person, MP York. We go over to agenda point 1, incoming documents. All members of the committee have received a list of incoming documents for the committee. The list is basically an overview of all the documents that were referred to the committee during a specific period of time. Are there any comments or proposals on the list as presented? No? If not, the list and the proposals for handling as discussed are approved. We go over to agenda point 2, discussion on the management of beaches and coastline and applicability and scope of Civil Code 5.26, beach policy and moratoriums. On March 17, 2022, Member of Parliament, Mrs. Wescot-Williams, sent a request to the Committee of Public Housing, Spatial Planning, Environment and Infrastructure for a meeting to discuss the management of beaches and coastline and the applicability and scope of the Civil Code 5.26, the beach policy and moratoriums. The request is recorded on the IS number 676, dated March 17, 2022, and can be found on the Parliament's Team General. Hence, today, this meeting. I would like to give the floor to MP Sarah Wescot-Williams for her opening remarks and motivation for this request. MP Wescot-Williams, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and a good morning to yourself, a good morning to my colleagues, to our support staff, and a good morning to the ministers and their support staffs. Welcome, good morning to all tuned in to this committee meeting of Parliament. Mr. Chairman, the letter, my communication that is subject of this particular agenda point is but one of the many queries and questions that I have submitted to government ministers, subsequent government ministers, regarding, firstly, the zoning of this country, secondly, and the beach policies. At this point in time, there are two so-called beach policies, one of CVROMI, that ministry, and one of the TIAT ministry. In asking these questions also during meetings, I was informed by the Minister of CVROMI that it is the intention to combine these policies and come with one policy for St. Martin. So I look forward during the handling of this agenda point to hear from the ministers how that has proceeded and if any action has been taken. Another matter that I constantly refer to, Mr. Chairman, is I want to now take it to the specific area and specific beach of Mullet Bay. And I have learned actually via of the Central Bank of Curaçao and St. Martin acting as Sun Resort or the other way around, or acting for Sun Resort, had in the past taken the government to court because they had submitted a request to government and government had not answered. I asked to receive the petition that CBCS had put to the court. What did it regard? Apparently, it regarded structures on the beach. And so I asked to receive the petition, one, as well as the response from government. After numerous questions in this regard, I received from the government a copy of the court's verdict that instructed the government to respond based on the earlier verdict, but it still has not informed me of what exactly was the issue and what has government done about whatever request there was. So, Mr. Chairman, and then my specific reference to the matter of the civil code has to do with the fact that, and now I paraphrase, our civil code with respect to beaches states that in order to give the usage of beaches out, those regulations should be established by national ordinance. I know there's a stream of thought that suggests that the compliance with that is regulated by the national ordinance on the granting of land and long lease. I disagree that it is regulated there, and thus my question to the ministry is, how is Book 5, Sub 26 of the Civil Code with respect to public beaches, which the court has decided our beaches are, how is that executed? How is the usage of beaches on St. Martin, how is it regulated? By landsverordening as per the Civil Code? And has that authority in one way or another been delegated to the government? As we all in here know quite well, a national ordinance to this effect would mean that Parliament has to pass that law. And I am unaware of such a law that regulates the usage, for the lack of a better word, of our beaches. And that ties into my question regarding what the CBCS/Sun Resort had requested about the structures on the beach of Mulletby. And so, Mr. Chairman, this is but one of the communications, as I mentioned before, that I, as Member of Parliament, have directed to the Minister of CVROMI, not necessarily, and I think only a small part pertains to the Minister or the current Minister of CVROMI, but the records of Parliament would show that I have similar questions regarding zoning, drainage, etc., going back to the year 2015, which was just 1 year after I assumed the position of Member of Parliament. Mr. Chairman, I think that I have sufficiently elaborated on this long outstanding request of mine, and I thank you.
Thank you, MP Wescot-Williams. Before I give the floor over to the Minister, in order to increase interaction on the topics to be discussed in this committee setting, I would like to suggest that after each member poses their questions or comments, that the Minister answer directly. Yeah? Okay. I now give the floor over to the Ministers of CVROMI and TEAT. To which Minister do I hand over? Okay. Minister of TEAT, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to you. Good morning to the Secretary General. Good morning to the honorable members of Parliament. And a pleasant good morning to my colleague minister and our support staff, those in the tribune, and all listening and viewing via all media outlets. As we gather here today, I am reminded of how vital it is to reshape, rebuild, reform, and restructure key policies that influence the sustainability and prosperity of St. Martin. Our beaches, one of our nation's most cherished assets, stand at the heart of our tourism sector, our local economy, and national identity. This discussion on the beach and vending policy is essential to ensure that our treasures remain as a source of pride and economic vitality for generations to come. Today, I would like to provide an overview of the existing draft policy, which serves as a comprehensive framework to regulate beach and water sport activities, ensuring long-term benefits for all. First, allow me to provide a brief history to set the foundation for what I will be addressing today. The purpose of this policy is to regulate all beach and water sports activities throughout St. Martin. vending regulations were transferred in 1995 to the Executive Council of the Island Territory of St. Martin. Previously, sorry, I have a little bug that's really bugging me on my, yeah, sorry about that. Previously, vending activities were governed by the General Policy Law, the Dutch Algemene Politiekeur van het eilandgebied Sint Maarten, juli 1975, which translates to General Policy Policy Ordinance of the Island Territory of St. Martin, July 1975. These regulations are now under the authority of the Minister of Tourism, Economic Affairs, Traffic and Telecommunication. The Island Ordinance Public Vending, the Dutch Eilandsverordening Openbare Standshandel, which translates to the Island Ordinance on Public Street Vending, addressed vending-related matters such as application approvals, cancellations, and penalties for non-compliance. Today, the department has been actively working to modernize and streamline these regulations, and result thus far is as follows. The ultimate goal of the draft beach vending policy seeks to replace all prior policies related to general and beach vending. Once finalized and approved, the policy will undergo reviews every 2 years to adapt to developments such as the beach erosion, natural and unnatural disasters, construction, and other changes. It starts with a definition of all beaches, the policy, based on 3 factors: the size of the beach, the location of the beach, and the type of activities, both water and land, permitted on the beach. A beach is defined as an area from the shoreline where the water breaks or the high water marks up to the established property boundaries or buildings. All beaches on St. Martin are for public use, and the beaches must be accessible to everyone, including local residents, tourists, for recreational purposes. Regarding licenses, it refers to the vending licenses and business licenses. The idea is to have the size and the location of each beach determine the number and type of activities allowed, ensuring that congestion and oversaturations are avoided while protecting the integrity of the beaches. Specific beaches will be entirely off limits to any economic activity due to environmental preservation, oceanographic conditions, and topographic challenges such as erosions or tidal movements. As it pertains to the beach size and locations, the size of the beach will determine the number of activities permitted, while the location will influence the type of activities. A set numbers of vendors and business licenses will be established for each beach. When it comes to the beach activities on the beaches, will be evenly distributed. The idea is to have it evenly distributed among the businesses and vendors to maintain order. Each vendor or business will be assigned a specific space, but this does not grant ownership or exclusivity. The idea is to have a standardized structure implemented to prevent an ad hoc infrastructure and ensure uniformity. The number of vendors per beach will depend on factors such as the beach size, the location, accessibility, and hotel usage. The plan of approach is as follows. The current beach and vending policy, which has been in place for over a decade, no longer addresses the environmental, economic, and operational realities of today. Guided by the principles of reshaping and rebuilding, the Ministry of TIAT and CVROMI are working collaboratively to separate the existing policy into 2 focus frameworks. The beach policy will be led by the Ministry of CVROMI. This will address environmental conservation, sustainable management, and spatial planning of beaches. And then the vending policy developed by Ministry of TIAT. This will regulate vending activities, ensuring compliance, equitable opportunities for local vendors, and enhance visitor experience. As it pertains to the moratorium on beach activities, the moratorium on the beach-related activities, which came into effect since March 8, 2016, has served as a necessary tool to prevent overall saturation of the market for beach activities, protect the natural environment from overuse and degradation, provide a framework to regulate activities until update updated policies are implemented are the 3 points. As we move forward, we must carefully consider to explore opportunities to lift moratoriums where appropriate. Any such steps will include introducing a sustainable and innovative economic activity that align with environmental and economic goals with clear guidelines to ensure transparency and compliance. Looking ahead, this policy revision is not merely a regulatory update. It represents an opportunity to reshape how we manage one of our most vital assets, rebuild trust with stakeholders, reform outdated practices, and restructure for a stronger and more sustainable future. I remain committed in engaging with all stakeholders and ensuring these policies reflect the aspirations of the people of St. Martin. In closing, I am reminded of how critical it is to act with purpose and vision. Through the R4 effect, we are taking decisive steps to preserve our beaches, create meaningful opportunities for our people, and secure a sustainable future for St. Martin. I extend my gratitude to the honorable members of Parliament for granting me the opportunity to provide the people of St. Martin with an overview of what lies ahead and what they can anticipate as we move forward. Through you, Mr. Chairman, I now look forward to engaging in a productive discussion with the honorable members of Parliament, hearing their thoughts, suggestions, and questions as we work together to refine this policy framework to best serve the interests of our people, of our nation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Minister Helga Martin. To which member of Parliament can I give the floor? See some. MP Wescot-Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and through you, I want to thank the Minister for outlining her approach towards the part of a beach policy that pertains to the Ministry of TIAT. And I only have a follow-up question really to that. If the Minister has a sort of a timeline with the actions that have been proposed or are envisioned by the Minister, if that can be provided, just to kind of keep a finger on the pulse of the activities. Secondly, recently, and it's definitely not the first time that we have seen this, we saw some, in true St. Martin style, some brawls taking place on the beach. Fighting, cussing, throwing down, tearing down, breaking down, I mean, you name it. Can the Minister provide some type of control and inspection on our main beaches until a policy that will include control, I assume, is put into place? It really, in some of the scenes that I have seen, look like a free-for-all type situation going on of our beaches, what seem to be visitors especially having to kind of like, make their way through these type of brawls. Again, I can't think of a better word, on our beaches. So is there any way, and it in essence comes back and ties into my discussions privately and publicly with the Minister of CVROMI about enforcing even our current policies, as outdated as they might be, including in the so-called General Police Ordinance. So is there any way, Minister, that you can find a sort of an in-between solution where the control and inspection on our beaches is concerned? Otherwise than that, Mr. Chairman, I again thank the Minister for the outline of her vision with respect to the beach policy from the perspective of the Ministry of TIAT. Thank you.
I turn to the Minister. Can the Minister answer any of the questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your questions, MP Wescot-Williams. The timeline is that actually that we plan to have the policy completed by Q3 of this year. That's our complete. That's our deadline to have it completed by Q3 of this year. As it pertains to the brawls on the beaches, this is something that maybe Minister of Justice and I can discuss to see if we can have more policing of the beaches during maybe Sundays when our people are on the beaches the most. Maybe have more police presence in that area would be something that we can look at. And I know the MP asked questions earlier, and I think most of it is pertaining to CVROMI, the questions that the MP asked earlier in her presentation, her opening remarks. So with that, I await any other questions from any other member of Parliament pertaining to this subject. Mr. Chairman, I think the Minister of CVROMI would like to also respond to this, if it's okay through you.
Minister of CVROMI, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just as it relates to vending on the beach, what's important to clarify is that land on the beach is not given out in long lease. Land on the beach is given out as, actually not given out at all, it's a rental agreement. So persons don't actually own the land in the same way that you would via ERFPAC. It's actually given out with a rental agreement that's done with CVROMI, and then the permit process, etc., comes through us as well for whatever structure comes on that beach, and then the vending license itself comes through TEAT. So just wanted to clarify that in actuality, there is no long lease on the beach in particular. It's always rental agreements.
Mr. Chairman, your indulgence, please.
MP Sarah Wescot-Williams has a follow-up question, I think.
Mr. Chairman, if you will allow me to interrupt the sequence of speakers according to the list, and I just need to know from the minister, that answer that was given, was it in the context of what the Minister of TEAT said, or was it in the context of my question regarding the civil code? I just need to know that, please.
Yes, so it was in the context of, I think you stated earlier that based on the civil code, issuances of land on the beach have to go through, based on the lands ordering, by a land ordering as per civil code. But it's not an issuance of land in the sense of how someone would get a piece of land in long lease. It's a rental agreement usually for 5 years.
Mr. Chairman, would you allow me to explain to the minister my reference to the civil code and the long lease? Let me be very, very specific on what I'm saying. In the civil code, it is stated that when it comes to our beaches, for persons to make use of it, I'm talking to put stuff on the beach, that should be regulated by national decree, by Landsverordening. And I said that there is a stream of thought in answer to my query that would suggest that where that is required, where that Landsverordening is required, that it is covered by the Landsverordening on long lease. So I ask through you if the minister understands where I am coming from with my question. So it's not about what the person is granted, it's about the stipulation in the civil code that speaks of the beaches and using it, putting whatever structure by Landsverordening. And does the minister agree with the stelling, with the stream of thought, that part of the civil code is covered by the Landsverordening uitgifte in erfpacht? So that's where I'm going with that. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me, because I figured the minister was referring to that question. I wanted to clarify. Thank you for allowing me to do so.
Thank you, MP Wescot-Williams. I see MP Peterson. Do you have anything to add to that particular topic that MP Wescot-Williams referred to?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to yourself, to the griffier, to the Secretariat, to the Honorable Minister of TEAT and the Minister of CVROMI here with the support staff, and to my honorable colleagues. Mr. Chairman, just to chime in on what MP Wescott was referring to, she's referring to Article 26 of Book 5 of the Civil Code. In Article 26, the first chapter, it says that all beaches are assumed to be in ownership of the country. And then she is speaking when it comes to what, so I think what MP Wescott is referring to is Section 2 of Article 26. And it says, beperking van de openbaarheid van aan het land toebehorende stranden. And I think MP Wescott is saying that this article basically concludes everything that is built on a beach. And if this is covered by what we have as the landsverordening op de uitgifte van erfpachten, which is our erfpachtsverordening. But if I may, to you, Mr. Chairman, Section 2 speaks of de beperking van de openbaarheid van aan het land toebehorende stranden. So it specifically speaks on beperking van de openbaarheid, which translates to stopping people from reaching the beach, stopping it from being a public beach, so basically privatizing a beach. And that, according to the Civil Code, has to be regulated by landsverordening via bijzondere toestemming. But to put a structure on the beach, let's say a snack bar, that does not fall under the beperking van de openbaarheid van aan het land toebehorende stranden, because it does not make the beach less public if a snack or bar. So it really needs to be put in the context of if a part of the beach is made so that only who got the snack bar is allowed to reach the beach, and it stops the beach from being a public beach, then I think that the national ordinance part of this article would come into play, as per MP Wescott-Williams' opinion. But to basically conclude it, the erfpachtsverordening, it gives the minister by national ordinance the opportunity to issue land in long lease and to issue land in gebruik and to bevreemd. But then the Civil Code says that if you want to privatize a beach, basically by making it not public, beperking van de openbaarheid, then you would have to do that by landsverordening. And I don't believe that has ever been done for St. Martin as yet. That's all I wanted to add. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I look at the ministers.
Yeah, no further comment from me, but I think that elucidation, and thank you through you, Mr. Chair, to the MP Peterson, I think that clarifies possibly MP Wescott-Williams' question, essentially that the right to give land is mandated to the minister. It's the question of when the action on the beach prohibits the public nature or usage of the beach, if I'm correct on the summation, as I'm not a lawyer, so.
Mr. Chairman?
You have something to add, MP?
Yeah. I don't know who the minister was looking for the clarification from, but indeed it has to do with that fact. That's what it states. And I believe that that beperking of the usage is happening, I would nearly want to say, on a large scale. That's the point that I'm getting at. And again, I look forward to hearing from the minister as well on the issue of the court case that was brought against the government. So I'll reserve my comments on that particular one. But I really want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing us to get clarity as we go along. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Wescott-Williams. I see that MP Duran has a question. You have the floor, MP Duran.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good day once again to one and all. Mr. Chairman, through you, I know when taking up the post as Minister of CVROMI, there were and continue to be quite, I don't know if to say a disconnect as to what the possibilities are, because clearly my colleague on the right and my colleague on the left differ from opinion in terms of what is allowed and what isn't allowed. I've been following what was there, and I would like to know from the minister if this is the case where, because for instance, what we've seen is in one instance, someone would apply for, let's just say, a water sports license or a restaurant license to operate on a beach. And I've had cases where they would then present to me a license from TIAT, so allowing them to operate without even having a location. And for me, I think that it should be the other way around. It's logically to be the other way around. So for me, Mr. Chairman, through you, I would like to know from the minister, are there cases like that pending now? If so, has there, because I know we started with my previous colleagues of TIAT at the time to sort of streamline it, whereas you first have to have the spot before you get the right to operate and or use. Has this been streamlined in the meantime? Is this what we speak about when in terms of merging the two beach policies together? Because there are also certain instances where persons don't pay for rental of space with beach shares, and others have to pay for rental of space with beach shares, which to me is unfair because they are already starting at a disadvantage, those that have to pay. So, Mr. Chairman, through you to the honorable ministers, has this been already streamlined in terms of what is allowed, what isn't allowed? I will leave it there for now and await clarity on that point. Thank you.
Can the minister give answer? Minister Helen Amadu?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your question, MP Duran. Through you, Mr. Chairman. According to our department, there's no request like that at the moment, but MP Duran made a strong, I agree with exactly what he stated, and that is exactly what will be taken in. It should go to VROMI first, to make sure that the land is approved, it's available, and then come to TIA. Those are the type of collaboration that will be seen in the policy as well. And I don't know if the Minister of VROMI has more to add to that, but that's all I can say on that thus far.
And now go over to MP La Cruz. You have the floor, MP La Cruz.
A blessed morning, Mr. Chairman. I'm so used to saying Madam Chairman, Madam Chair Lady, to the SG, both ministers and your support staff, those in the Tribune, my fellow colleagues here in Parliament, and those watching via social media. Madam Chair Lady, right before this meeting, I said Madam Chair Lady. Mr. Chairman, right before the meeting, I did have the conversation with the previous Minister of VROMI concerning the same situation with the policies. And when I heard the meeting started with the integration of both policies, I was like, hey, yes, okay, finally. But I'm going to take it a little further by asking this question. We are speaking about activities on an existing building or within an existing building, and that is the collaboration between VROMI and TIAT. But what is even more important is that before one invests in putting a building up, that is automatically, it is said right away, hey, I am going to do business on this location, that VROMI gets in touch with TIAT, and TIAT then says, yes, this type of business on this location will be allowed, because it makes absolutely no sense that the building permit is granted, the individual then, or the individuals build the building, and then they are not allowed to do the business that they initially started there. That is opening a court case. And most of the times, when we end up in court, or when government ends up in court, to the judge, they don't speak about VROMI and TIAT, they speak about government. And if there's no collaboration in government, then that has nothing to do with the justice system itself. So my suggestion, when we were in the ministry, I had a conversation with the chief of staff of VROMI then, and I asked her, do you think that it would be possible that when someone submits a building permit, that right away that building permit, if you would have to request a business license, that goes automatically. So from VROMI, they get in touch with TIAT, and then TIAT says, yes, we would have no problem with this, and then the building permit is granted, and not that it is built and then vice versa. So that would be my suggestion when it comes to the collaboration between VROMI and TIAT, aligning both things. So not just for buildings that already exist, but also buildings that are going to be built. And that was my input. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Got to get used to that one.
Thank you, MP La Cruz. I see MP Sarah Wescot-Williams has a mic on. Yes?
Thank you once again, Mr. Chairman. I just want to assuage my colleague to my left, that no, he doesn't have to worry too much. There's not a difference of opinion or whatever between any two colleagues, at least not where I'm concerned, but rather to try to reach a solution and an understanding with respect to the issue at hand. Of course, the stipulation in the Civil Code is very broad. What is considered limitation? Trying to find a good word, a good translation for the beperking, because if I have to go out of my way to get to a public beach because of whatever structures or whatever have you is on the beach, that to me would be kind of beperking the public nature of the beach. When I received just recently from some residents in Fort Williams, complaints with them getting to the beach. I don't think it's that they can't get there, but rather what they got to do to get to a public beach. So I would just advise, also listening to the request by the Minister of TIAT in terms of giving input into the drafting of the policy, that this matter be looked into. And then again, yes, given the state of the property of Mullet Bay and the beach, of course, at Mullet Bay, I think special attention needs to be paid urgently to that matter. That's what I want to put here. And when I say that, I mean because of the developments that are taking place and the sale or not of Mullet Bay, et cetera, and what potential buyers, and hopefully the government will be part of that, but I know how my colleague to my left feels about that. But, whoever, that there's some conditions with respect to that. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to give that to the two ministers. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Wescott-Williams. Before going over to the next member, I look at the ministers. Would they like to reply to any of the MPs? Minister CVROMI, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just two comments actually on the suggestion from the Honorable MP La Cruz through you, defining what activities are allowed before a vending license is issued, of course, given the amount of money it costs. Agreed, nothing is currently being done. In particular, in areas where, not necessarily the beach, but generally other areas on the island where people are asking for vending licenses, and there is already established collaboration between the ministries, and in particular very strong between two ministers regarding making sure that those areas are actually usable for now. So the suggestion is well founded as well. And then moving on to the point from MP Wescot-Williams, completely agree, and I think the first step actually is defining how do you define access? Because legally you have to have access to a public beach. Is that access meaning a 3-meter wide gap every 200 meters, or is it necessarily access through the restaurant? And by definition now, access just means that there's some way to get on this beach, no matter how, hard it may be. But I think within our policy, we really have to look about how we define what access means.
MP Myers, you have a point of interjection.
I have to further elaborate on that statement by the Minister of CVROMI. I believe that the access should be defined as access by medical personnel. So access to all beaches should be wide enough that ambulance service police officers will have direct access to get as close to the beach as possible. I think that is where we have missed, because typically now the access to the beaches is just a track. It's a small little track, and in the case of emergencies, that small little track is not enough for ambulance services.
Thank you, MP Myers. The following member is MP Roseberg. MP Roseberg, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chairman. Blessed morning, Griffier, Minister of the Youth and support staff, and Minister of CVROMI as well, and support staff and my dear colleagues. I do believe, seeing that it's a discussion that we're currently having, I can only imagine how the public might view it, and therefore, although we have Article 26 of Book 5, it's pretty broad, and I do believe, if I, for example, compare it to neighboring countries such as Curacao, where for a lot of beaches you charge, and on St. Martin that's not the case, the accessibility should be pretty clear and not made difficult for the public, because often you see that, for example, business owners who have different chairs on beaches, that the ones that would like to make use of the beach are being sometimes bullied, like, no, you're not allowed to sit here, or you have to pay a certain amount to sit in this area. I even imagine that if you want to sit first row, let's say you have a towel and you would like to sit on the first row, without making use of that beach chair, it can become an issue. And the question is that allowed? So I do believe that it needs to be made clear in policy so that everyone can understand what is allowed, what's not allowed, without any consequences being faced. Because how I look at the law, but that's an interpretation, and yeah, as a lawyer, you always have interpretation forms, and I do believe you need to make it clear for everyone to understand that beperking van de openbaarheid, once that takes place, without having the bijzondere toestemming, it becomes an issue. So the first article, lid 1, is stating that it is eigendom van het land, and the accessibility should be made accessible for everyone to make use of it, unless there's other situation in case. So please, to the honorable ministers, make that policy clear for everyone to understand, so that that person can protect themselves by ways of law. That's my input for now. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, MP Roseberg. I look at the ministers. Would they like to reply to what MP Roseberg has stated? Minister of Tiat, you have the floor.
Thank you, MP Roseberg. In general, I just wanted to make a general statement, and while I do appreciate the suggestion posed by MP Roseberg, I just wanted to also maybe state to the members of parliament that something that we're considering as well is maybe having lifeguards, something that we've been, recently a tourist just drowned. So it's something that we also consider, and I know it's going to be costly to have a lifeguard at maybe 2 or 3 of the main public beaches. It's something that we're considering as well to see how we can incorporate it budget-wise. But having a lifeguard policing the beach is also something that we can consider, and maybe have him, empower him with certain authorities to, you know, to man the beaches. So not only for the safety, but also for make sure that everything is running across the board as stipulated by the policy as well. It's something we can look forward to doing as well.
Thank you, Minister. I see the next speaker would be MP Duran. MP Duran, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually had, I think the Minister of T had read in my phone, I actually had lifeguard written down as one of the first points, because I know that in Curacao, I'm not sure if it's security or lifeguard, but in any case, I believe that on the main beaches, especially in the weekend, we can see how we can facilitate to have lifeguard, even if it's on an on-call basis or days that there are many ships in port. I guess the government can use that to their discretion, how they want to tackle it, and also find a way to generate the revenue to pay them as well. I know that, because that's always one thing. When you give out one place, you have to find a way to bring it back. I move on to my points. Mr. Chairman, we live on an island. As a minister of CVROMI at the time, I always say one of the most difficult things is deciding between the development and environment, because it's coupled together, and it's a hard choice to make in certain instances. We have restaurants on our beaches. We get a lot of complaints from certain individuals, what is allowed, what isn't allowed. But yet we travel to the Bahamas to experience certain beach-like activities. We see nice pictures of the Maldives and how they are developed and what they do. But we have to travel hours and miles to experience this. I would like to know, through even Grand Cars, you basically have restaurants in the water. And over here, there's always this discussion. I believe in development, but I also believe in doing it responsible. So I would like to know through you, Mr. Chairman, what is the government's view? So both from an economic perspective and then the environmental perspective, what are your thoughts on development on a beach? Because I've been faced with a lot of controversial statements and so over the last couple of years as to my stance. But I do believe that we need to remember we live on an island, and the way of our income is tourism, and what attracts tourism is the way and the activities that we have to bring them to our shores. So I believe in development. I reference the Maldives and those kind of things, but I also would like to know that and emphasize that it has to be done responsible. We can't have the beaches looking like, for instance, a carnival village where there's a booth everywhere. I understand that can't be done. Everything has to be done in moderation. But I would like to also just keep emphasis on the fact that our products, our beaches, our different experiences, the nightlife, and that is how we bring and generate revenue to the coffers. So I could be clear, from an economic perspective and an environmental perspective, what are the thoughts of the two ministers in terms of development on the beach, with the examples given? Thanks.
Thank you, MP Duran. I see that the Minister of CVROMI would like to have the floor. Minister of CVROMI, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Completely agree that with the Honorable MP Duran that there needs to be a synergy between our tourism product and environment. I think one of the key examples, the Maldives, for example, if you look at the use of the lagoon, of the waterways in the Maldives, it's low impact over the water, in the water. One of the challenges I think that we face is that we don't necessarily, at least in my time, or have come across any designs that have placed that low impact into over the water. What has been placed for several decades is usually a very tall, very intrusive coastline hotel that doesn't really make use of things like over-the-sea bungalows. It's really just a big concrete structure on the coastline, which in of itself, it goes against a lot of what we actually allow versus in our building ordinance, in our own policies. So I agree, something like that can be looked into once it actually enhances and doesn't destroy the environment. So point well taken. And just to clarify as well, the example given of Grand Cause wasn't built in the sea or near the sea. Erosion caused a lot of these restaurants to be in the water. If I recall growing up, going to Grand Cause, there were sea grape trees that kept the shoreline back, and there was quite a distance between the beach. If you go now to areas, most of Grand Cause is in the water, not because by design, but by erosion. So mitigation efforts is what you really have to look into when you're going to maintain and build on your coastline. And something that we also are looking at, and let me preface that will be mentioned, there will be it will be explained a bit further based on your agenda, point 4, on, for example, the part of roaming which involves sustainable management and environmental conservation to the point of the beach policy. But just to be very simple, because I've been very long-winded here, I do agree with the MPs. Look at how we can do a bit more use of the water once it's environmentally limiting in terms of its impact.
Thank you, Minister. I see that the Minister of TIAT also wants to chime in on the topic.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. MP, through you, MPs Duran's question regarding economic activities on beach, I welcome it, 100%. I welcome any economic activity, but it just needs to be structured. As you noticed earlier too, I welcome activities for the carnival booths. Same thing, you're going to see how we're going to try our utmost this year to structure how the booths are going to be allowed along the street. And that will give at least a little semblance of what's to come with the beach policy as well. Things just need to be structured. We need to find out the size of what type of water sports activities are allowed there. Once it's structured, it's in place and everyone knows the rules and stick by the plan of approach and the policies in place. I see no problems with having any sort of economic activities. Restaurants, it's bustling. When you're on the beach, you wanna interact. You wanna do some things extra. You just don't want to swim, but it needs to be. One of my main concerns is especially water sports. It has to be in a way that it's away from the beach goers. That no accidents won't happen. Stuff like that. We actually looking forward in looking towards doing in collaboration with, of course, with CVROMI. But yes, I welcome any kind of economical activity on the beach once it's structured.
Thank you, Minister. MP Duran has a comment based on what the minister just said.
Thank you, both ministers, for your responses. So I just want to put it in a nutshell based on the economic and environmental point. If I synopsize it correctly, you're saying that once, for instance, a project like the Maldives, once it's brought in a environmentally sustainable manner, whether with piles or whatever have you, minimalize concrete and all those things, it will have your support.
Minister of Romi.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I think once anything has to be vetted properly, but we also have to remember piling is not environmentally sound. There are nature-based solutions towards sort of water management and containment of an area of water that can be built on. So piling is actually one of the most intrusive, and there are other ways. But again, everything has to be looked at comprehensively, and I never say no to anything once I can have substantiation and once I can have a pros and cons way out of its environmental impact to economic value. Those things, two things are very important. So, yeah.
Thank you. Minister, I see that the next speaker is MP Weaver. Wait 1 second, MP Weaver. I think MP was a little mistake. MP Peterson. You have the floor, MP Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I wanted to give an example of the whole beach and the usage. When Hurricane Irma hit, Sun Resorts then was claiming ownership of the beach part of Mullet Bay, and back then there were some gentlemen who had a license from TEAT, basically permission to use the beach for a snack bar and to rent out, I think, beach shares. And when they wanted to put back the structures on the beach, their stuff was bulldozed by the Sun Resorts, by the company back then. Why? Because the company was claiming ownership of the beach, and therefore that the gentleman could not rebuild what they had built. And they took it to court. And the court ruled in the favor of the gentleman. Why? Because Sun Resorts could not prove, as per the same article, that they received the ownership door vervreemding, as like the article specifies, and therefore the gentlemen were allowed to be placed back there. And then CVROMI also, I think, then gave them the rental agreement as per the verdict of the court, and that's how they got to operate. So there you can see a clear distinction between the usage of the beach, but not what the law is speaking about, which is the beperking van de openbaarheid, which talks about the accessibility. And I agree with all the MPs. That's where we need to look at, because when we look at the beach bars that get a license to be placed, on the beach, then we need to look at what the rental agreement says. Then we need to look at what the law says. Because if, for example, a beach bar has a party, and for the duration of that party, access to that part of the beach is not granted to people who have not paid an entrance ticket, for example, then we are nearing the beperking van de openbaarheid. So I think that, the issue of communication between CVROMI and also TEAT is kind of like where it sits, because I remember sitting in Domain, we received a lot of people who came to us with an existing license from TEAT that basically gave them a location. So I remember seeing people coming with a vending license that says the location on the Pondville, yet no communication was made with Domain Affairs as to if there is space on the Pondville. So like MP La Cruz said, there needs to be some sort of a, let's say, a link between not only the license, but all up to the way to build. And of course, it gets a little tricky because, MP La Cruz tried to propose it, but then you will get into the situation of civil law and bestuursrecht, because to build, you only need the permission of the owner. But then to get to build, you need a building permit from government. So there's some technicalities to go about it, but I think when it comes to the communication between TEAT and CVROMI, and I think that it starts by TEAT, because people come to request what they want to do by TEAT, and then TEAT, sometimes without talking to CVROMI, and maybe not now, but it was like that in the past, they assign a location without asking the ministry that goes over infrastructure and land, etc. So I think that if that's also included in the whole plan, then we should be, further ahead. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, MP. I look at the ministers. Do the ministers have? Yes, I see a Minister of CVROMI. The floor.
Just a small comment, maybe on the issue of, because I think a lot of people don't actually know the procedures. And I think one of the things, just we've been discussing is possibly sort of a graphic or infomercial on the clarification of procedures. Even something as simple in the budget debate we discussed, what is the procedure to apply for a house at Belvedere? A lot of people have come to me not doing the procedure, and it was clarified in a simple 4-step. How long it takes is a different story than in this meeting. But I think, you know, in something as simple as taking the point of MP Pearson, just making an infomercial to put government information and procedures out there more clearly. Because sometimes it takes having to know somebody inside to get it done, and that's not how government should function. So, point taken.
Thank you, Minister. I see that MP Wever would like to have the floor. MP Wever, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, good afternoon to ministers present here today, the support staff, those tuning in via whichever media, those present here today, and my colleagues present. I'm happy to hear that the draft beach policy is currently being vetted and also in review. One of the concerns I had as well was the same as MP Wescot-Williams when it came to the barkers on the beach. So I'm happy that that is one of the points that is addressed. Pertaining to the lifeguards, maybe a way, just throwing it out there, maybe a way for payment is also to include it within the rental fees to those that have establishments on the beach as a way of also contributing towards this, you know, because at the end of the day, they are also benefiting from those and having a safe beach for them to be able to do their business. And also, in line with that as well, is there also within the policy the beach cleaning, a way how we can ramp it up as well within the, because I know there were proposals in the past as well, where they had some organizations that came and wanted to provide beach cleaners as well. But especially when you're looking at the Phillipsburg area, that's heavily trafficked with the tourists as well, that you need to have that kind of look, you know, because quite often we hear the complaints with, oh, the garbage bins, but then where are you going to put garbage bins? You know, you have to, it has to be aesthetic, but it has to complement what we're trying to sell out there as well. But not only for the tourists, but for us as locals using the beaches as well. For instance, there was a lot of talk as well with when establishment came on board on the Mullet Bay as well, when you hear the correlation with possibility of the boardwalk, redoing the boardwalk on Mullet Bay. What is kind of the update on that? Is that something that has just gone through the window? Is that something that the government is still looking to pursue to kind of enhance Mullet Bay again, as it used to be? And of course, I think the minister hit on it as well. The public, to bring the awareness to the public once the policies are in place, to know, to give the people the knowledge as to what their rights are, because quite often we have vendors on the beach too that kind of claim, no, this belongs to us, you're not allowed to use this part of the beach. I think we've had that before when we had Roxy there in on the beach as well, where it came a bit intimidating, where the public felt like they are not able to go to that beach, you know, so to kind of avoid that, to have that public campaign. So I totally support that as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, MP Wever. I look at the ministers. Minister of TEAT, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your suggestion on how we can a way to make a payment towards the lifeguard. That's something we can consider for sure. And the beach cleaning improvement, that's something, that's not a bad idea. Thank you for that, through you, Mr. Chairman, MP Wever. But yes, according to the Minister of CVROMI just whispered in my ear that that's already in the district cleaning contracts. But maybe it's something we can do, because many kids look to get their community hours. Maybe it's something we can engage the community with on a quarterly basis, have an initiative done with schools and make sure that we push it and let them know that the government is assisting. Maybe we can all roll up our sleeves and maybe with the Minister of ECYS, do a campaign on a quarterly basis and choose a beach every quarter and implement it in the policy to make sure that government and the community engaging in cleaning our beaches, that's something we can also consider doing. And with that, I think I'll leave the latter part of your statement, MP, through you, Mr. Chairman, for the Minister for CVROMI to respond on.
Thank you, Minister. Minister CVROMI.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Regarding the status of the boardwalk on Mullet Bay, that's something that I'll have to take up in review. I do know that it was publicly stated that that was part of the plan for that area with the development that some of the developments that happened over the years. Where that status is, Mr. Chair, through you, I will have to investigate what happened and what considerations might have been involved in it not being realized.
Thank you, Minister. I see that the next speaker is MP Wescot-Williams. MP Wescot-Williams, you have the floor.
Thank you once again, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I heard the answer and I agree with the opinions that it requires a very, very careful balance in terms of development vis-a-vis the environmental concerns. And while we can learn from other areas, countries, whatever have you, islands, but when push comes to shove, it's about our current situation here on St. Martin. And that's what really needs to be looked at. Unfortunately, in terms of development, we can't close shop. But we could establish opening hours. And I use this adage to say, you know, we just can't say stop everything. It might sound popular, but you have to look at the consequences. So, but we could establish opening hours. And I would, through you, Mr. Chairman, given the discussions that touched on the issue of the Simpson Bay Lagoon, I would, through you and this committee, ask both ministers at some point in the future, in the not-too-distant future, to also have a discussion regarding the Simpson Bay Lagoon and the management thereof with Parliament. So I put this there as basically as a request in this meeting. And then I believe that a clearer policy with respect to requesting economic and environmental impact studies, that it be established when and how. And when it's established when, that no shortcuts are given. Just have the study done, because not only is it about having a study done, it's also about putting some safeguards in place. It shouldn't be looked at negatively, oh yeah, then that might stop the development, but rather looked at in terms of some of the safeguards that we wouldn't know off the top of our head could be established by such and you know, and put into place. And again, I want to come back here in some of the suggestions that I heard from my colleagues and from the ministers. And we are going to have to work much closer, as well as structurally, with developers in terms of getting something out of it for St. Martin as well. And especially if any type of incentives are being looked at for investors, that we make sure that we get something out of it. Social corporate responsibility. I want to touch on the gambling when it comes to that, and the institutions involved that we employ, the protect the player principle, again, not something just falling out of the sky, but these are principles that that exist where, you know, where this matter is a problem. Because the problems that we face, erosion and otherwise, again, look at the road coming up by DV, and you know, that road there and what is happening there as well. So again, we can't just assume because it works and it's not a problem in other countries like ours that means it can work here as well. So I look forward to receiving follow-up on the beach policy, the working out of this issue about beperking, because touching on a subject that came up as well, the fact that you have unregulated motorized water sports, is that kind of limiting the use of a public beach as well, and then from a safety angle. So it's these are not easy issues, but we have to have the discussions, and given where we are today in our development, come up with together with those who are proposing to develop with strategies that would benefit our island, our people, and our visitors. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, MP Wescot-Williams. Do the Minister, Minister of Theatre, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, I was going to say Madam Chair Lady, but thank you, MP Wescot-Williams, for highlighting the Simpson Bay Lagoon. It just sparked not an idea, it sparked a thought to let you know that that does have our, that too has our attention. And it's a priority for us because personally, I do believe SLAC has been, it leaves a lot to desire how SLAC has been managing the lagoon, and that's one of the reasons we mentioned earlier that we want to impose or looking into creating an ocean authority as well, and that too can be taken up into maybe coming up with new policies on how the lagoon has to be managed, and a lot of different authorities is going to be one of the main focus of this ministry, to have more structure and policies and rules in place to how we manage our every different department on the Ministry of Theatre. So the Ocean Authority is one of the that we have also on our to-do list this year, and with that in place, also taking up maybe how we manage the lagoon. That would be taken up in there, and coastal waterways. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of Theatre. I see the Minister of CVROMI also wants to chime in.
Yes, just very quickly, Mr. Chair, on the comment of MP Wescot-Williams, with the environmental impact studies that are currently done, there is no policy in place in which it's regulated how you do or what development needs a study. It's done in close collaboration upon reviewing certain permits via the policy department as well as the SG that they deem necessary to have an environmental impact study done. Of course, having said that, that can make it very subjective. So I think regulating those sort of the parameters as how you trigger an environmental impact study is necessary. And then furthermore, regarding your statement about sort of corporate social responsibility of investors in St. Martin, I mentioned in the budget debate meeting some of my ideas for a revenue generation, include the Environmental Impact Fund. Tomorrow, actually, I'm having a discussion with these St. Martin Development Fund as to how to set up that type of fund and also the parameters as to how that would be used. The idea behind it essentially is that when an investor invests a certain amount in the country, particularly if it is environmentally compromising, they will have to give back a certain amount of money to this fund. That still has to be determined what it will be used for. It can be environmental impact issues, so nature. It could also go towards things like education as well as health. So we're going to try and begin that discussion tomorrow as to how we are going to define that fund as a way to sort of increase corporate responsibility, and I think especially in terms of sort of more participation in investment, simply because what you find oftentimes that people buy a piece of land for $500,000 and then sell one condo for $1.2 million. What does that do to the population? It means that housing becomes relatively out of touch. It also inflates values of land around it. So how can we give back towards that? These are all elements we're looking at in this Environmental Impact Fund to sort of create that balance between investor and citizen, resident, and also between economic development and the environment.
Thank you, Minister. I give the floor to MP Wever. Go into the list. No?
MP Johnson was before me, but the mic went on and off. But
Would MP Janssen like to go first?
Please. Yes, please. Thank
go
you.
after.
MP
Thank you.
Janssen-Webster, the
Thank
floor
you,
is yours.
Mr. Chairman. I would like to go first because I just wanted to touch base on a point that was brought previously. So good afternoon to the ministers present and their support staff, and good afternoon to my colleagues and members of the public viewing and listening. Regarding the beach cleaning, I just wanted to add that in the district cleaning contracts, I have noticed that beach cleaning is part of it. So I was thinking that it might be a bit easier. It might fall under enforcement, as was in the motion brought forward last week and approved in Parliament. The enforcement of those contracts that we already have, because beach cleaning is in there, and I would like, via you, Mr. Chair, to ask the Minister to look into the reports of the district cleaners and see those that have beaches assigned to them, have they been cleaning the beaches regularly, because that will help a lot. I'm also thinking of the Simsimi Lagoon. Whenever we are looking into the Simsimi Lagoon, if the ministry also, via you, Madam Chair, sorry, Mr. Chairman, that the ministry could look at the raw sewage and wastewater going into that lagoon. I think that it's a public secret, we all know. I have visited restaurants on the lagoon where you look in the water and you see raw feces right there. There are also restaurants that I can point out that you see the pipes going directly into not only the lagoon but also into the sea. Right there on Simpson Bay. So it's there are a lot of environmental infractions that are being done by the people themselves, and these are things that need to be looked into. Also, some big industry that the wastewater is also getting into our water system. So that's additional for you all maybe to look at, but I know that the Nature Foundation did testing of the water quality, and they did mention, if I'm not mistaken, some years ago about the quality that there is some kind of sewage contamination. So I think we need to look into that because tourists come here for the beaches. I think it's like 80% come for the beaches, so or participate in beach activities when they're here. So it's very important for our economy as well. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Janssen-Webster. Would any of the ministers like to reply to what was just said? Minister CVROMI, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I was hoping to get to the next because we do a combined comment. But okay, I'll take this comment right away. Regarding the raw sewage, indeed, I think it's a very known public secret. If anybody goes to upper parts of Simpson Bay Lagoon, that is essentially a wasteland of sewage. And it's one of the biggest challenges, not only in the lagoon, but also as we're busy fixing the roads as well. One of the reasons we're experiencing a delay is because we still have a lot of raw sewage on ATLH Road and Arch Road in particular. And again, this is why it's so important, the element of enforcement and the realization of the National Ordinance Administrative Enforcement, which is going to come shortly to pass. But again, it's the idea that everyone knows within their neighborhood roughly who's letting out sewage. CVROMI has a capacity issue, we know that. Secondly, even if we go to a site, we can issue a warning letter. And then unless it becomes a criminal offense to go to the prosecutor, then it kind of stops there. So the enforcement element is very important to us, but I also urge people to, as I said it before, just with like garbage, you know who your neighbor is, who's letting out sewage, report it to the ministry, document it. Because the very interesting part is that people run sewage raw, usually in early morning at 5 a.m., no one's really looking, and late at night. So again, reporting it to CVROMI is very important because it's a collective effort. And, you know, it's delaying. A lot of people are coming to me about Arch Road and ATLH Road. We cannot go into those areas to resurface if the road has running sewage constantly. So your neighbor, who you're trying to protect and be friends with, is delaying the progress of your road. So while we all live in one small community, it cannot be disadvantaging everybody because you're allowed to run sewage. Regarding overall a bigger picture for sewage, there is a trust fund project underway now called SWAMP, which actually addresses in the long term our plan for sewage. I think it's going to sort of, well, it's kicked off about 3 months ago, the kickoff meeting led by the SG of CVROMI along with his colleague SGs, because it is an interministerial initiative. And the aim is, of course, to see how we can connect everyone to a main sewage line and also how we manage sewage. And it will call, of course, for reinforcement of our inspection department. And there is, of course, a task force that's going to be put in place that will be led by CVROMI to coordinate these efforts as well.
Thank you, Minister. MP Weaver, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dovetailing on my colleague next to me as well, pertaining to the sewage that's on the beaches especially, is there also going to be an element within the policy where testing and frequency of testing is part of it, and also to divulge that information to the public once the testing is done, especially to those that the beaches which are more frequently used by the swimmers and the public. And then I know it might be a little off topic, Minister, but seeing that you're here as well, and you mentioned the road works, I just have a small question that some persons did approach me with. Great job by Bishop Hill. And then you moved over, but then there's a section right there by Defiance where the supermarket is. There's a pretty big pothole there. Is there a reasoning why that was skipped and then moved on further down the road? Just a question for the public. Thank you.
Minister, before answering the questions from MP Weaver, the last question pertaining to the roadworks, can you answer that during the next agenda point, please? The following agenda point 3. Can you reserve that answer for the next agenda point? Thank you. Would you like to also answer right away, or do we move on to the next speaker? Minister of CVROMI, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I'm just checking with my team. Give me 1 second.
In the meantime, I think it would be advantageous if we move on to the next speaker while the Minister caucuses with his staff. The next speaker would be MP Lewis. MP Lewis, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, Chairman. Good afternoon to the honorable ministers and their staff. Good afternoon to my colleagues here in Parliament. Good afternoon, St. Martin. Just to chime in based on what MP Myers also stated with the accessibility on the beaches, I would like to know, when it comes to the Simpson Bay Lagoon, the docking site at the substation, there where the development is going on, I think by the Goya brothers, the hotel that is being erected there, have the Minister T.A.T. or the Minister of CVROMI noticed that big hole that is right there between the dock and Old Simpson Bay Road? Also, I need to know if it's on the side of T.A.T. or CVROMI, because it has to do with an infrastructure situation. Yesterday, there was an incident there. There was an incident where a tourist was probably injured on a boat, and the ambulance had to go there to pick up the person. It took them a long time because of that big hole, that big erosion, whatever you want to call it there, to get that passenger off. People was actually crying because of the situation where they couldn't even get, they were not even related to the individual. So I want to know, what can we do? And how fast and who is responsible, be it on the side of T.A.T., seeing that T.A.T. is responsible for the harbor. I do not know if SLAC is responsible for that docking port, or if it has to do with the infrastructure side from the Minister of CVROMI. how soon can we have that hole closed up and fixed there by the old Simpson Bay Road? That will be all for now, Chairman.
Thank you, MP Lewis. I give the floor to Minister of ROMI.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Regarding the whole, and let me clarify first, there's currently done testing, this is MP Chris Weaver's question, there's currently testing that does happen on the beaches. This is in collaboration with the Inspection Department of Nature Foundation, and there's a maximum total of 30 tests that are done per year on the beach. Sorry, 10. Including, yeah. So 10 tests per, I have to start wearing glasses, 10 tests that need to be done per year. That also includes the lagoon as well. Moving on to the question of MP Lewis, indeed that hole is very aware, I'm very aware of that hole. Exactly, we've actually had several discussions already with developers in that area who are willing to help with the well, one, the repair of the existing dock, which has been sort of in a deplorable state for quite some time, as well as the beautification of the area, including fixing of the hole. Those discussions are ongoing, and I will, of course, apprise Parliament if that's necessary going forward as to how that's going to be. It was a question of solidifying an agreement as to what that PPP would look like, but there is a lot of willingness from the developers to have that be fixed. One, because it's supposed to be your entry point to your country for most luxury yachts that can't dock through the bridge. And secondly, it's a massive safety hazard. I myself have almost fell in there reversing one night, which is unfortunate. But you know, imagine someone who doesn't know it's there and visiting, it is a hazard. So it does have my attention and it will be followed up relatively soon.
Minister of TIAT.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The dock in general had my attention, through you, Mr. Chairman, MP Lewis, that it was my intention to meet with the harbor to have a discussion, but now that we're even discussing that whole, I think we should have a collaborative meeting, myself and the Minister of ROMI and the harbor, to discuss what we can do about that entire area, not only the infrastructure, the road, but also the entire dock needs upgrading. I'm going to try my best to see if we can, if our schedules permit next week, to have a meeting with the harbor and with the MP, the minister, and myself, to discuss how we can move forward to develop that area, beautify it, upgrade it together.
Thank you, ministers. I see the next speaker is MP Roseberg. MP Roseberg, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to think outside the box and seeing what was said previously in regards to the cleanups, maybe it's also an idea to work with the Justice Ministry, seeing that there are a lot of people that are doing community service, for example, and need to make their hours. So maybe it's an idea as well that the ministries work together and maybe even with Nature Foundation make an agreement with the Justice Ministry that certain hours in regards to beach cleanups can also fall into the S.A. Bay services that are being offered. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Roseberg. I see that MP Wescot-Williams would like to add to that.
Yes, thank you once again, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank the Minister of ROMI for explaining once again the rationale behind the administrative enforcement. This was quite, not really an issue, but it definitely was a topic during the budget debate. And one of the motions passed unanimously by Parliament for administrative enforcement to be applied to the waste ordinance. This administrative enforcement, as explained again by the minister, has to do with basically taking the criminal part out of the application of different laws and whatever have you. I always want to, not always, but I remind persons of the difference in this approach vis-a-vis going via the penal code for example, garbage. One can recall that many years ago, the commissioner at the time had placed several boards at different locations prohibiting persons to dump garbage, which in fact is an offense. But in small letters on that board, it was written that you would be prosecuted on the basis of the penal code. Well, we know, once that's stated there, by the time you get it through prosecutor and whatever else have you, I mean, anyhow. And that's why the transition to administrative enforcement is so important. And I highlight this again to, for example, suggest to the Minister of TIAT that that ministry too looks at the administrative enforcement of the existing laws, enabling the ministry or someone designated by the ministry to make up, if necessary, fines to warn persons, etc., etc. Having stated that, I also hear the issue, which is nothing new, about the lack of capacity. And again, I want to give to the Minister of TIAT the Parliament's support for the creation, even if it requires training in collaboration with the other ministries, a team, an inspection/control team. Because if you are going in the direction, Mr. Chairman, of administrative enforcement, you need the control. And I believe that the ministries together, spearheaded by maybe, just a suggestion, the inspection team of TIAT, to make it possible to control. You can't enforce a law if you don't have the control out there. So I really want to give the minister, in looking at a possible amending of her budget, to look at creating this inspection team to go out and make sure that our laws are followed. And if they're not, then to apply administrative enforcement. You can be warned, you can be fined, and that can happen from the relevant ministry. And that's why I keep stressing this issue about administrative enforcement. And Mr. Chairman, I like some of the commitments that I'm getting from these two ministries here, and I look forward to these being very clearly established as a result of this meeting, because I don't want to every month ask about the beach policy knowing that it is being worked on and knowing that we are looking at having it instituted by the third quarter, for example. So these commitments and timelines by the ministers are important, that they're documented and where necessary followed up on by Parliament. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, MP Wescot-Williams. Before we move on to the ministers, I would like to get the sentiments from MP Jansen-Webster and MP Wever. Yep. MP Jansen-Webster, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to add to what was said about, the ideas of the ministers, that they're really good, and I see us going forward, especially when I hear the Minister of TIA talk about tackling the area, beautifying the area there and the dock. I just wanted, through you, Mr. Chairman, to ask the Minister to take into consideration that it was said recently that the lifespan of the Simpson Bay Bridge there is, about 10 years? Might be less. We all know that we need to widen the bridge also to be able to receive the bigger yachts coming in, etc. And so there has been a plan all along to widen the bridge and fix the dock area. So we can't fix the dock area now without taking into consideration that we'll be widening the bridge. So I just wanted to remind the minister about that, so we don't have capital for anything. We can fix it now and then in a couple of years fix it again because we're widening the bridge. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, MP. MP Wever.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to go back on the answer the minister gave with the water testing. So if I'm correct, so it's 10 tests annually. Is that something that can be increased, or are we looking to increase it? I'm just asking because we can see influx within the sewage as well, within the community as well. So at least once a month, to me, seems like the bare minimum, at least. Could you maybe provide an overview which beaches are these? Are they mainly those that are mostly occupied by persons? Just to have a clarification on that. And also, which lab is currently analyzing these tests? And are they certified to analyze the tests? Thank you.
Thank you, MP Wever. I see that the Minister of TIAT would like to have the floor. Minister, the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Regarding the statements made by MP Wescot-Williams, when I got in a few months ago, about 7 months ago, the first thing I did was meet with each and every department to hear their challenges and hear what their wants and needs were. And one of the main things in the inspectorate department was that very, very few of them have BAFPOL. So I mentioned it, I think, in the presentation to Parliament last week that we have an advice in place ready to have 7 of them go through their BAFPOL training. And that's why we are unable thus far to enforce, because it's very manpower, the lack of inspectors with the BAFPOL training that would allow them to put out these fines. So with that in place, I'm sure through you, Mr. Chairman, that we will be able to then enforce a lot more. And then secondly, I'm going to mention, like MP Duran mentioned before, it feels like a camera is on my notes, because I just mentioned to my cabinet and kind of gave the director a heads up that the Minister of CVROMI and I are going to be meeting with him next week to discuss the dock and the bridge. So those are that's going to be indeed taken up, both of them, that entire area from the bridge expansion, discussions on that, and of course the beautification. So indeed, MP Jansen-Webster, we will be having that broad discussion on collaborating between the 2 ministries and the harbor as to how we can make that area more beautiful and effective and more economic. Thank you.
I see that Minister of CVROMI would also like to chime in on that topic.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the comments from MP Wever, yes, 10 tests done annually, and what we're actually working on is, I mentioned it briefly in the budget debate, together with the Ministry of TIAT, we're trying to see if we can have the increase in the subsidy for Nature Foundation, hopefully by amendment May 2025. This would also allow then the increased possibilities for more services rendered to government by the Nature Foundation. And then lastly, the lab that does the testing is SLS, yes, and they are certified by government. Yeah, that's it from my side. Yeah.
Thank you, Minister. Given the time, we'll be rounding off with this agenda point. So any closing statements from the members? I see MP Lacruz would like to. MP Lacruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just in reference to what the Minister of TIAT just mentioned concerning the BAFPOL, I will urge the Minister to also get in touch with the Minister of Justice, because this was once already set up and allocated. I don't know, it didn't go through, but the inspectors of TIAT were also complaining concerning payment, that they felt that at that time, because they upgraded themselves to become BAFPOLers, that they wanted an increase in their salaries. So it doesn't make much sense if you pay that amount of money to make them BAFPOLers and then they don't do the work because they're not being paid for that. So let's look at it as broad as possible and take care of it from every perspective, so that there are no excuses on not being able to do the work as the BAFPOLers. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, MP Lacruz. MP Wescot-Williams, would you like to, do you have any closing statements on the topic?
Yeah, I try to make that my closing statements on the topic, but it ties into what MP Lacruz stated. And I want to give to the Minister of TIAT, again, yes, indeed, the BAFPOL, making more persons, giving them the authority of BAF pullers. And Minister, I want to encourage you to take that proposal to the Council of Ministers and see which other ministries can work along with you to create as large a team as possible as we strive for more and more administrative enforcement. So I want those two things to be linked, and we create bigger several teams for this inspection on behalf of the ministries that have to enforce different laws. And I look forward, if necessary, if it requires a budget amendment, that this approach be formalized. And my colleague mentioned the Ministry of Justice, indeed, for the justice part, but if we could get some trained persons that we then can charge with the enforcement of the laws in the areas that the government and parliament consider important, safety being one, cleanliness of the island, etc., etc. So I just want to support and expand on what my colleague has stated. And I think it's also important, as the government seeks different funding avenues, that the public-private partnerships be considered a way of funding specific areas within government. I really think that's important. As you all know, I constantly stress that we need to find different funding modalities in order to take on the many issues that need to be taken on. Thank you once again, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, MP Wescot-Williams. Seeing that we're coming to the end of this agenda point, and also one of the ministers needs to take leave, I'll just pose my questions directly right away. Ministers, I'm elated to hear all the concerns about the public beach access. It falls, and also the pending beach ordinance update, or the beach policy update. It falls in line with basically the motion that I presented in October that was passed. Also in point 4, that the government look into mandating a particular width of beach access, of access to the beach along with a walkway. In the motion, it was advised 3 to 4 meters, but I guess upon further research, the government will come up with their own stipulations as it pertains to that. Also, unifying the two beach policies, I don't think I fully understood if the beach policy, the update from TEAT, has to also do with the synergy with CVROMI. So if the minister can make that a bit clearer. Going a bit deeper into the beach access, often what is forgotten is beach parking, or basically parking in the vicinity of a beach, because if we have to look at a very known issue, beachgoers that would like to go to the DV Little Bay beach, they have to park outside of the boom at the security and then walk a distance to the beach. So my question is, in the new beach policy and the update, will there be some type of mandate or instructions as it pertains to parking in the vicinity of the beach? Also, it was made clear that beachgoers are not aware of the rules and regulations, I would say, of the beach. And of course, putting the beach policy out would not be the way to go, but more in the sense of layman's terms as it comes to instructions and how the do's and don'ts on the beach, or what the rights are of the beachgoers. Is the ministry or the ministries looking into, I think that this would fall under the Ministry of TEAT, looking into putting up such boards that it would make such a process a bit more transparent for the beachgoers. I also heard the Minister of TEAT make mention of, for example, a lagoon authority that would go over the management and the upholding of certain laws and rules and regulations in the lagoon. But my question would more delve a bit deeper in for the Minister of CVROMI. What is being done as it pertains to upholding the current laws, rules, and regulations. Because, for example, during the budget debate, I brought an example of where an entire pier was erected, and if I understood correctly, that was without permission of the ministry. So what's being done with these processes, or would this also fall under the lagoon, the pending lagoon authority, or does VROMI have another idea to tackle this issue? We addressed, the topic of sewage was also addressed. As it pertains to mandates, I think it's island-wide confusion. Who has the mandate to fine obstructors of that rule? So if I understood correctly, the Ministry of Justice has the mandate, the Ministry of VROMI has the mandate, the Ministry of V.S.A. has the mandate. What can the minister make clear? Who has the mandate? What's the difference between the mandates, and what is being done, especially as it pertains to BAFPOL, for the sewage issue to be addressed? And is this also an interministerial thing, problem that would have to be taken up with the Ministry of V.S.A.? And looking over, and lastly, the beach cleaning. Are all beaches on the Dutch side assigned to someone as it pertains to the cleaning of the beaches? Because I hear here and there are some beaches that are privately cleaned or privately upheld. Are all beaches on the Dutch side currently assigned to someone to clean the beach? And that would be it for my questions. To which minister? Minister of TIA, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your questions. I'll start with the statement made by MP La Cruz regarding the collaboration with the Justice Department. Yes, the issue we kind of were faced with is that the Justice back then kind of put it on the back burner due to budget constraints. So we went ahead without Justice and proposed to have our inspectors train in Bonaire. So that's all that advice is making its way for approval very soon. And I'm happy for the suggestions posed by MP Wescot-Williams regarding the multi-ministerial approach on enforcement. That's something we should take into consideration and collaborate on. And lastly, I think one of the questions posed by yourself, MP, Mr. Chairman, is the unified beach policies would look into when the request for vending permits on the beach, it has to be done in collaboration with the Ministry of VROMI, as stated earlier, mentioned earlier by MP Duran, that we collaborate with each other before issuing any such vendors permit. And also that we maybe collaborate with each other on how we enforce the rules and regulations as well. So that's why we are making it one. From inception to end, from the inception of requesting a permit, that it will be done in a collaborative effort if we issue it yes or no, and then also maintaining the rules and regulations on the beach. And I think the rest of your question that you posed, Mr. Chairman, was mainly directed to the Minister of VROMI, so I'll end it with that. And thank the members of Parliament for all their suggestions, and it will be taken up. I will review this meeting and go over all the suggestions and make sure that we include what is said here in the policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of TIAT. Minister of VROMI, the floor is yours.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chair. Regarding the parking in the vicinity of the beach that you asked, indeed, something that's being considered where possible. Obviously, some areas already built up in and around the beach. That limits how much parking you can do. But I think it's important to include those policies going forward. And whatever new development happens, and wherever we can sort of find space for it within existing structures. Yes, and of course, in agenda point 4 that we still have to do, we will also discuss zoning within which this is covered as well. What is being done with the rules and regulations? Indeed, I think it's a question about, and also to your question about who's enforcing currently, and I think it goes back to what Minister of TIAT said, is that the challenge that VROMI has had, as well as other ministries, is that the issue of BAFPOL. So in the past, there were a number of inspectors who were trained in BAFPOL. I know my predecessor tried to implement BAFPOL training. It was indicated that it could only be done in the Dutch language. We found recently that it's actually possible to do it in English. It's an option we are exploring as well. But I think for what we need it for and the process and time it takes to go through that criminal/penal process, the administrative enforcement is where we see the most potential in terms of enforcement and rapid response and enforcement of these rules in future. Then finally, I believe, are all beaches assigned? Indeed, all beaches are assigned in the district cleaning. A question, of course, becomes, is it happening regularly and enough? And also, too, from the side of ROMI, the inspection and maintenance of these contracts. We do have contract managers, very few. So we do oftentimes rely on the public to send us information that we can use to document an infraction. Oftentimes, that's very often how we find information out via public support. So again, I call on the community to realize their role in supporting the government in keeping the place clean and helping haulers also and district cleaners contracted to maintain their obligations in their contract. And that's it, Mr. Chair, I believe. If I've missed something, do let me know. And again, I thank the members of Parliament for their questions on this agenda point.
Thank you. And with that, we have come to the end of this agenda point. I would like to thank the ministers and their support staff, along with the members, for their indulgence thus far. And before going on to, or moving on to agenda point 3, I would like to adjourn the meeting for 5 minutes in order to allow the Minister of TIA to take leave. Adjournment for 5 minutes. I hereby reopen this meeting. We now go over to agenda point 3. Discussion with the Minister of ROMI on the state of our infrastructure and the progress and prioritization of capital expenditure projects. IS 298 to 2024-2025, dated November 19th, 2024. On November 19, 2024, I, Member of Parliament Darrell York, submitted a request for a meeting of this committee to discuss and receive a comprehensive update on the following key concerns. 1, infrastructural assessment, review the recent weather-related challenges, pinpoint affected areas, and identify system vulnerabilities. 2, response and mitigation, update on actions taken to manage immediate risks, including resource allocation and contingency plans. 3, capital expenditure progress, provide status updates on timelines, budgets, and implementation of key infrastructure projects. Number 4, resilience strategies, outline long-term plans and policies to handle the rise in climate-related incidents. And number 5, pond management plan, request a status update on the government's action plan, which was to be submitted within 30 days following recommendations from relevant studies assessing the condition of St. Martin's ponds. Hence today, this meeting. I would like to further motivate my request for this meeting with the following. Given the recent severe weather events and vulnerabilities they exposed in our infrastructure, it is critical that we convene to address these key issues impacting our community safety and resilience. These include assessing infrastructural weaknesses, reviewing the actions taken to manage immediate risk, and receiving updates on key infrastructure projects and their budgets. Additionally, long-term resilience plans on the management of the ponds must be addressed and ensured, to ensure we are prepared for future climate changes. I now give the floor to the Minister of ROMI, Mr. Patrice Gomes, for his opening remarks and/or presentation. Minister of ROMI, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me begin my presentation very quickly, as I know time is limited. A bit of a context. In 2014, 13 draft zoning plans or development plans, each district of the country of St. Martin, were delivered by Royal Haskoning DHV in collaboration with the Ministry of ROMI. Zoning plans on Planning are established by national ordinance. Therefore, the regulations included in the zoning plans are legally binding. The Landverordening Ruimtelijke Ontwikkelingsplanning, National Ordinance on Spatial Development, prescribes the legislative process for creating a zoning plan. In addition to these 13 draft zoning plans, there is one separate zoning plan for Fort Amsterdam, which was formally established in 1999. The zoning plans regulate spatial development of the country of St. Martin for a period of 5 years, after which plans, if deemed necessary, need to be revised. The plans regulate where construction is allowed or prohibited, how high buildings may be, what building density on a lot may be, and what the land may be used for, such as residential, center, nature, recreation, marina, sport, or industrial purposes. I'd like to also go on to say that we have now moved away from the idea of 13 zoning plans into one comprehensive island-wide zoning plan. The rationale for this is that we are better able to regulate and issue policies if we look at the island as a whole and not segmented. So, with that, I'd like to turn to my presentation, zoning plan for nature and coastal areas, hillsides, and water bodies. Bit of a background, Parliament passed a motion on October 29, 2024. Zoning of Mullet Bay was one of the key priorities, designation of Mullet Pond as a national park, a unified beach policy, and protection of remaining pond areas. I believe in the meeting, agenda point 1, we clarified that third agenda point, and we move on now to the agenda point regarding zoning of Mullet Bay, becoming a Mullet Pond as a national park, and protecting of pond areas. Government's response, creation of a zoning plan. One second. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for this very obvious suggestion. Creation of a zoning plan for natural and coastal areas, hillsides, and water bodies. The zoning plan established by national ordinance, as stated before. With this plan, the following and more can be regulated. Building provision in and around areas such as coastal areas, beaches, water bodies, natural gutters, and hillsides. Protection and conservation. Implementation of climate change adaptation and mitigation measures. Strict low building density and building height regulations. Designation of terrestrial and marine nature parks, requirement of environmental impact studies, assessments as was previously discussed, and of course strict regulations on water management, drainage, deforestation, excavation, dredging, and filling of water and infrastructure developments in designated areas. What we have here is a preliminary map of the plan. Let me just seconds. What we have here is the preliminary plan map of the coastal and ecologically sensitive areas as identified by the ministry. These areas include those which are agricultural, those which are green and park areas, natural areas, recreation and day recreation areas, recreation for the beach, recreation, stay-over recreation, sport, water, and water natural values. This, of course, is the proposed zoning area for this coastal and ecological sensitive areas. We do have this map on hand, able to be further perused by the members of parliament at the end of the presentation. General planning. For years, we've been speaking about zoning, and it takes quite some time, given the fact that it is a national that's come to parliament. What we have tried to do in this short period of time is break down 3 steps in which we can realize the ultimate goal, which is actually legal zoning of the entire 16 square miles of St. Martin. We started off towards the beginning of this year, end of last year actually, the letter of intent submitted to Parliament that was published, outlining our commitment towards the motion, as well as short-term goals and how we plan to achieve this. The next step to this, of course, is using this letter of intent towards establishment of preparatory resolutions, the so-called voorbereidingsbesluiten, by myself, and this is, of course, a possibility based on the Landsverordening Ruimtelijke Ontwikkelingsplannen, so Spatial Development Plan, whereby which the minister is empowered to designate areas for a period of no longer than 1.5 years, and then can be subsequently renewed for 2 periods of 6 months of areas that he wishes, of course in consultation with other stakeholders, to have zoned or protected for particular reasons. This has happened in the past, and the plan is, of course, to use this instrument to fill the gap in between the beginning of the process towards the long-term zoning plan and the realization of that plan. Because what we don't want to have happen is that something exists, nothing exists in between that period. So this preparatory resolution, so the voorbereidingsbesluiten, will be used as an option towards how we protect in the short term, so very urgently, very immediately, how we protect certain areas as mentioned within the motion and throughout St. Martin that also would impact the areas along the coastline as mentioned. And of course, the long-term plan is established as a proper zoning plan, the national ordinance by Parliament. This long-term planning, as indicated, is quite long. This is exactly why we have the suggestion of the preparatory resolutions. We envision 4 phases. The first phase is for internal preparation, which have started, to form a zoning team, update drafts on map-protected areas. Phase 2, public consultations, which are required by law, to engage with stakeholders, incorporate their feedback, and refine our drafts. Phase 3 is the legal process, to conduct hearings, review public appeals, finalize legal documents. And finally, phase 4, submission to Parliament, present the plan for approval as legally binding ordinance. Prerequisites, we've identified a budget of $150,000 to $200,000. The idea is, of course, the zoning team will include a process manager, a legal expert, a GIS mapping expert, researchers, a policy team, communications manager, stakeholder mediator, and finally, a committee of experts. This committee of experts originally existed prior to 10-10-10, or actually just after 10-10-10, where people with very different expertise would come in, of course, weigh in on the different areas. This has to be implemented by a Landsbeslart, which we will have to work on. Regarding any possible questions around the budget, because of course that's very sensitive, we do have two potential ways of funding this entire long-term planning. So remember that while this is happening, we would have already, through the resolutions, designated certain areas until this long-term process is realized. The budgeting is, two options are seen as potential within the 1.4 million euros that we've received from the Dutch government for capacity building. Once the priorities of the waste reforms are realized, that's the remaining amount of money we envision to use for this budget allocation, given the fact that a lot of the issues around, you can of course tie in a lot of issues around waste reforms with the manner in which we use the land. Second option for that is using SPHERE. SPHERE is a World Bank capacity building project, which government has allocated amount of money for, and we can use that money to fund this project once the government agrees on a unified project proposal. So in short, the good news is it may not have to come out of our national budget. This following slide gives a very a Gantt chart overview of how long the process is. Having already started with the first two to three steps, we are still relatively on schedule. We're a couple of days off, but you know, we make up for it as we go. With the intention to have this finalized by the summer of 2026. Any questions on this? Could we continue or? Yeah, okay. I can't read that. This following slide, of course, breaks down all the different, and this is more sort of a work plan of the different measures that have to be taken within every step, from the internal preparations, the public consultations, the legal process finalization, all that has to take place, a very detailed work plan, who is involved in the work plan, the timeline, and the costs associated with every single step needed to realize zoning in its full implementation via national ordinance. And this comes into presentation, and of course, if any questions, and of course, we can invite the members of parliament to peruse the map that we have shown earlier. Do that toward the end, or we can do that now as well at your discretion, Mr. Chair.
I think if I look at the members, we will leave that for the end. Yes, we'll leave that for the end. Thank you, Minister, for your presentation. I now look at the members to see who would like to speak. I see the first speaker will be MP Lacruz. MP Lacruz, you have the floor.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Chairman, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chairman, could you ask the Minister of CVROMI if he could send the presentation to the members so that we could actually see, because the writing was really small, and from here it was extremely difficult. So all I could do is listen, but I couldn't read and keep up. And if we could have, while that is happening, if we could then maybe take a look at the map and then come back with questions, if that would be a suggestion. 5 minutes should
What I would like
enough.
to suggest, MP, thanks for that suggestion. I would suggest that we take a 5-minute adjourn for 5 minutes in order to receive. I understood that the presentation in the meantime has been sent, but in order for members to be able to peruse the presentation and ask relevant questions pertaining to the map. So I hereby adjourn the meeting for 5 minutes. Good afternoon once again. I hereby reopen this meeting. Upon closing the meeting, we are about to go over to the members to whom which would like to pose questions to the minister. Upon adjourning the meeting, I see that MP Wescot-Williams would like to ask her questions. MP Wescot-Williams, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually had looked back to see if any of my colleagues had specific questions on the topic, because mine is not really off topic, but it is a request to the minister. Minister, in one of the motions passed in Parliament following the budget debate, and that is the one on the motorsports park. And added into the considerations thereof was the following: the possibilities of a lane/course for cyclists and other road and off-road sports be looked into. For example, between quotation, a corridor from the Princess Juliana International Airport to the French side. And then it goes on, as well as the possibilities of revamping our existing sporting infrastructure with the goal of sport tourism in mind. End of consideration in the motion to which I'm referring. And through you, Mr. Chairman, I just want to ask of the minister if, in looking at the zoning as well as the road network, if the minister, along with relevant stakeholders, can come up with a pilot project of a road that would include some of the elements of sports and wellness. It's not only about sports tourism, so the many cyclists who we see now on the roads, visiting St. Martin and on the roads, and truth be told, sometimes, and depending on the roads that they're on, I really hold my heart. But besides that, also for the local population. For example, Minister, I know because I consider it a walking course, that around the Great Salt Pond, it's about 6K. If you take the road, the Sualiga Boulevard, if you take that road, it's approximately 3K. Imagine a circle like that, if it can be considered a circle, being designated a sort of a sports and wellness trajectory. I know it's like totally, off the top of my head, but if we could identify, and together you with your ministry and stakeholders could come up with an area, a road, a rotunda, so to speak, where this would be possible. And I just give it to you, and Mr. Chairman, I would like it to be recorded as part of this motion where the focus is on a motorsports park, if the capital budget can be had as suggested in the motion, but if we can look at it from a local sports, cycling, and the like, as well as a wellness perspective. I mean, that exercising in the open and in natural environments is the best you can have in terms of exercising, etc. So I would really like, Minister, just give it some consideration and see what ideas you can come up with where that is concerned. And I thank you so much and look forward to hearing from you on it. And I know some persons who would voluntarily work with you to kind of exchange those ideas. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank, of course, the Minister for his presentation on the zoning proposal. Oh, yeah, and with respect to that, I had a question, Mr. Chairman, and that is in terms of preparing preparatory resolutions, are there any in the make, and is there any listing of priorities where these are concerned? But thank you very much for the chart in terms of how you're working on the countrywide zoning plan. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, MP Wescot-Williams. I see that MP La Cruz would like to chime in on the topic. MP La Cruz, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I expressly asked to see the map because in the presentation it wasn't totally clear on the map, even when it's made a lot bigger. And my question was, because I've seen that the new government has decided to take agriculture extra serious. Okay, so when I saw on the map, I'm looking to see if there's, especially where there's already agriculture, if there's any plans to maybe decide to say, okay, you know what, we know that, for example, the property where the farmer, Mr. D.T.J. Wyatt is, that it is residential, but that is not what is being used for right now. So my suggestion would have been, if we look at, and it's not only about the property where Mr. Wyatt is now using, but every other property that there's agriculture on it already, even if it's residential or commercial, why don't we find a way to make that then a property that is focused or will be focused on agriculture? Because if it was from the beginning, if it wasn't no good for agriculture, they would not be using it for agriculture. So that is something that I would have liked to see in the map that I am not seeing. So that is an idea for the minister, because it would be sad that after all of this goes through, that we end up having to go back and revisit the whole plan. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, MP La Cruz. I look at the minister. Minister, would you like to respond directly? Minister Vromi, the floor is yours.
Yep, just a brief comments on what was stated. First by MP Wescot-Williams. Indeed, I think government has a very strong role to play in facilitating health and wellness and incorporating that more into our everyday life. So that point will be noted as part of how we look at our overall spatial planning going forward. Bearing, of course, in mind where possible, given that we do have limited space, but if we can think of creative ways of using existing spaces, that is something that we can welcome for sure. Preparatory resolutions, they are, from what we discussed, I think there are currently no valid ones in place. All of them have already expired. And I think the next question you asked was, are there any that, what was it? Yes, priorities, exactly. Yes, indeed, a number of priorities, particularly regarding the areas around the ponds as indicated in the motion, as well as areas that we want to protect. So that includes the land that we're supposed to receive back from Rainforest NV. That is the area commonly known as the Amelia Wilson Estate. That is something that has a priority for us for several reasons. One, any further development of that area will only lead to further congestion of the Dutch cul-de-sac area. Two, that is one of the areas proposed already that has a very high density of biodiversity on St. Martin. And finally, three, I think it's very important in the context of MP York's motion that, and he mentioned it briefly in the budget debate, not only are you protecting the coastline and waterways, you also have to protect what happens upstream. So if we continue to build in natural waterways, which is what is in that park itself, we actually undermine our efforts here to protect any coastline or area we think seem fit. A lot of water that ends up in Great Bay comes exactly from the cul-de-sac area. If you don't protect that and make that a priority, which is what we're trying to do, then you basically have runoff of sediment that can go right back into what you actually just protected. So that's critical in terms of protecting environment and also in terms of addressing the congestion issue in that area, and the fact that we don't necessarily have a green space zoned legally within the country as yet. So those are my priority areas going forward. Mr. Chair, through you. Oh, and also my apologies, MP La Cruz. Indeed, it's important to realize that I think several people have designated areas that generally are for residential use. I mean, the whole of cul-de-sac was originally the bedbasket of Dutch St. Martin. That is now being used for residential areas. It is, of course, possible to zone per May brief what everybody's using their land for, but that kind of defeats the whole entire purpose of a general one zone, simply because then you will have some boys growing on one maple leaf, next door to them is a house, next door to them is a garage. So you really have to have, at the most point possible, kind of a more comprehensive general area zone for certain purposes. And I think what's very important for me, and it can be looked into, I discussed this quite a bit in my, I won't say the word campaign, but in campaigning, how do you bridge urban space with agriculture, or you do with urban gardens? And one of the proposals is, for example, if people look at the idea of you have a lot of flat roofs on St. Martin, can you make use of those areas that have a lot of flat roofs towards agriculture on your roof? And VROMI can, for example, look at, okay, if you use your area of flat roof towards agricultural purposes, you can get, for example, a reduction on your FPAC rent, because it's then used communally for a communal purpose. Everyone has a communal garden on your particular roof. So these are ways in which we can kind of bridge the gap between what you're talking about, which is basically having somebody just have a single garden in one area and then kind of have it not necessarily comprehensive to everything else around it. So in the interest of that, zoning has to be more broader than just one single person's initiative in their neighborhood. I think, of course, when you look at it from the point of view of that area, Dutch cul-de-sac, it is the most fertile area. That's one of the reasons why it's zoned as agricultural/green areas. But it's something we have to consider as well, that zoning for every single parcel of land differently would defeat the entire purpose of zoning.
Thank you, Minister VROMI. I see that the next speaker is MP Utley. MP Utley, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good day to Honorable Minister VROMI. Honorable Minister, thank you for your presentation. However, I did not get the essence of the mitigation as it pertains to weather to avoid what happened in November. I kind of wanted to see a plan of action for that. Also, as it pertains to the points, infrastructure assessment, point 1, what is a bit of advice? Look into urban study. An urban study is the study to design a city, design the town. And then you have urbanism. Urbanism is how the inhabitants will react. So such as my colleague before me spoke about the racetrack and the ability for persons to be able to walk and cycle. That would be what you call the urbanism. And the reason I say this is that I too was in Simpson Bay yesterday and I just looked at the traffic and I realized that we have a serious problem because we push tourism, we want millions of visitors to be here, but yet we don't have the accessibility or the roads do not provide, the possibility to move freely. So what we do need, Minister, I know you have your hands full, but while you work on the short-term goals, I would like you to have your team focus on short, mid, and long-term. But your long-term should be an urban study and urbanism, whereby a study can be done to basically redesign the structure of certain areas. And that's the only way we are going to be able to survive and make it happen. There was also a discussion a couple of years ago. If you can just follow me for a minute through you, Mr. Chair, when you come down the roundabout and you go through Cold Bay, for instance, if making Cold Bay all to the bridge, come around Simpson Bay, a big roundabout, whereby it'll be a 2-lane, that was a discussion, St. Martin. It was a 2-lane, so when you go Cold Bay, you'll be in both lanes. That takes you all around through the causeway. And Simpson Bay, you're coming from the airport, headed up, it would be 2 lanes. That was a discussion. But the only way to get this discussion moving is to have an urban study, an urbanism, whereby we can see if it would be beneficial and what side roads and other roads would be needed in order for persons to cut off and if they need to be. So just some ideas. All right, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, MP Utley. Before going back over to the Minister, I see that MP Wever would like to add. MP Wever, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pertaining to hillside policy, I know there's also discussions with limitation of building. I know it might be easier to curb if it's a government-owned land, but I know there's certain properties that are privately owned. So it's not based on government land. How does the government then address that concern? Because let's say if I had a plot of land on a hill and it's not government owned, and now I'm restricted from building there, what it would be my compensation in that sense, because if that's my only land I have, what are my options then? You know, so that, seeing if there's a plan to tackle those two situations. And then also for the minister, through you, Mr. Chair, not to forget my previous question pertaining to the Bishop Hill and the Defiance area with the road work. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, MP Weaver. MP La Cruz indicated that he wanted to piggyback off of something that was said. MP La Cruz, the floor is yours.
No, Mr. Chairman, you're incorrect. It is not about piggybacking. I want to make a comment concerning the statement that I made and the reply that I got from the minister. Mr. Chairman, through you to the minister, and I hope I understood properly, but I hope that that is not what I understood. Do you get that? What I understood is that the minister was looking into an idea where you would be able to have gardens on the top of your buildings. That is all nice, but that would be, to me, a concrete jungle that I would be. We're looking at then, for example, an area like Phillipsburg, that if you have a flat roof, you could put a garden on top of that. Now, there's no space in Phillipsburg for agriculture. That I understand. But what I am talking about is an area like in the cul-de-sac area that already is busy with agriculture. You know, so to me it is refreshing if my property is next to a nice green property that will never be developed because it is only agriculture. So that is somewhat, I hope that that's not what the minister was implying, because anyone that hears that, they'll think, okay, even if I have a property, I don't need a yard no more. I could just build on the property and put a garden on top and it'll be okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, MP La Cruz. I give the floor to the minister. Minister, you have the floor.
Yeah, let me begin by clarifying on the point of MP La Cruz. MP La Cruz had asked the question about persons who are individually currently doing agriculture in a particular area. My response to that was the intention of zoning is not to zone every single person's current activity, because that by default means you don't really have a zoning plan. So if my property is growing plants, the next one has a garage, the next one has a house, the next one has a guest house, that defeats the whole purpose of zoning. It's not to say that we're not necessarily going to take into consideration existing elements, but we also have to make tough decisions that not because you do something means it can continue. It's a greater good discussion when you zone. That's why it comes to Parliament, because some people at some point have to take, for lack of a better word, a hit in terms of what is allowed where. Currently, for example, in areas like Ebenezer, Dutch Quarter, St. Peter's, which is predominantly zoned as residential, people are executing garage and mechanic operations. So should I zone that Maybrief as a mechanic shop through you, Mr. Chair, because it exists, and then have someone with a house nearby? So that's why I said it's very challenging to zone per Maybrief, because you disadvantage the greater good for individuals' interests. I haven't stated in any way that we're not going to necessarily look at agriculture or anyone's current situation, but zoning has to be comprehensive, because if I zone and allow someone to have a garage, spraying cars next to a farm, next to someone's house, it sort of defeats the whole value of someone's house and the whole plan of zoning, because you're not really doing what you tell to do, which is kind of do a comprehensive plan towards development. So with that, I don't necessarily think we can look at every individual piece of property. It really has to be comprehensive. When it comes to agriculture, I can share the sentiments of the MP that agriculture is less intrusive than would be a mechanic shop. But if I start the precedence of zoning per everyone's individual current Maybrief activity, then we have a bigger problem we currently have. So we're basically going to zone and legislate the okay, but we're currently having. That's not the objective of zoning at all. But agriculture, of course, does have less impact. And with urban spaces and gardens, of course, that has more to do with very urban spaces like Phillipsburg, where most of it, or a lot of it, is government-owned land. So that's where that comes in. There's less and less government-owned land the further out you go, of course, with some exceptions. MP Otley, mitigation going forward, and I think I had asked that question, should I include that going forward or not? Indeed, mitigation is something that we made very, that wasn't touched on necessarily in the presentation, simply because we outlined that very clearly, I think, in the budget debate, where we said the enforcement of civil works permits is the biggest issue. In October of last year, the ministry set about contracting Acrobatic X, who are basically a company that does a lot of mitigation efforts currently in the country. They've done, for example, the Governor's Cabinet. They've also submitted studies in the past regarding how to mitigate erosion on the Point Blanche Road heading to the harbor, all of which speaks about some of the mistakes we've made in the past that have caused this. And I can read it, or I can just summarize from the report itself. It speaks about, for example, when you excavate land and you have too steep of a degree in your slope and excavation, and you backfill and you don't necessarily put the proper retaining walls in place, that is something that causes a lot of the erosion we're experiencing now, particularly in the hills. So enforcement of the civil works permit request is what we need to do to mitigate. Secondly, we also have to ensure that people actually put on the ground what is in their drawing. So that comes back to enforcement of inspections mandate, which will be supported by the Administrative Enforcement National Ordinance. And then I agree with you strongly, urban planning is needed. And it goes back to the same idea of MP La Cruz, where it's a question of what is it that you want for a particular area. I'm not going to build luxury condos and have a garage next to it painting cars. I'm not going to build a family home and put a nightclub next to it either. So this idea of a comprehensive approach to what we allow in a bigger scope is really important, and a discussion is being had, was had already a couple of months ago with the Ministry of AZ, in particular Interior and Kingdom Affairs, where we actually are proposing a project for a comprehensive urban plan for the country using EU funding. Of course, there are other reports that we know have been done, but considering that so much has changed from a lot of these reports we do have to update it, so it might take some time. But in the process of approving certain things, I am taking the back of my mind with the assistance of my team that certain things shouldn't be allowed or carried out. That includes, for example, people who have made briefs that state that you're allowed to have 2 stories, and all of a sudden there's 10-story condos on that area. Why is it limited? Because the capacity to drain, the capacity for roads isn't present when you only are allowed to build 2 stories, and somehow you have an approval for a 10-story building. So this is why it goes back to the fact that sometimes you have to make tough decisions of what you allow. Not because something is allowed or has been allowed, we can continue to allow it. But of course, we will consider things which are very environmentally maybe not as intrusive, such as agriculture. And then on the point of MP waiver, the hillside policy, government-owned land, compensation to not being allowed to build, and the truth is there is no compensation. St. Martin is not the only country that has this situation. There are a lot of countries around the world. Just because you own private land doesn't mean you can do whatever you want. You know, I believe very strongly in the principle of land ownership, but if things that you want to do on your private property sort of negatively impacts the common and the whole, we can't necessarily allow it. I mean, it goes not only for CVROMI, but also for any ministry, I think. It's really about looking at the greater good versus individual needs and desires. And regarding your last question on Bishop Hill pothole, I have to get clarity myself, as my team might know, exactly why we overlooked that site. I did pass there last night when the resurfacing was continuing, and I did notice it, and I queried why this is still here. And I will get back to you as soon as possible on an answer in that regard. Yeah, and that's the last comment for me for now, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. I look over to my speakers list. I see that MP Wescot-Williams would like to have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and again, thanks to the Minister. Minister, dovetailing on mention of the hillside policy, and many years ago, during my founding days for St. Martin, I don't know if the hillside policy was even in place, but what I do know is that especially where government land in Saunders is concerned, that once a plan was submitted for a building, persons of VROMI, so from the VROMI ministry, would actually tell people they could not cut into the hills in a certain way. I remember of persons who would have started to cut their land before this check took place, were actually stopped until they could have followed whatever instructions. You don't cut straight down, you cut, whatever the technical aspects were. And I don't know if they were backed up by the hillside policy at the time, but I do know that many persons, especially higher up in the hill in Saunders, face that kind of control by the Ministry of ROMI. So I just wanted to say that, and then I wanted to ask the minister, if the minister is aware, I know they have very strict nature policies in terms of building. I'm talking the French side now. With them, I mean they. And as I, on the causeway here just the other day, looked up in the very beautiful and green hills again because of the rain, and then it is so very obvious the difference in terms of our side, in terms of how high we're building, and then the French side, not at all. Is that a matter of not yet at all, that you don't see the same scenes up in the hill, or is it because they cannot? And I'm talking now, if you just stand on the causeway and you look up in the hill. So I asked if the minister knows that, and then they I was looking at a comment I got there, but then I want to support this matter of urbanization plan for St. Martin. And when it comes down to the causeway / the Simpson Bay Airport Road, I have a slightly different take on how I think that could possibly develop, and that would be, causeway more for through traffic, and then I don't want to go as far as saying only pedestrian traffic on the other road, but definitely slower traffic, and then it really lives up to the name of a strip, an entertainment strip. For the other road than the causeway. So I just wanted to add that little point there, but very much interested in the matter of the hillside policy. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, MP Wescot-Williams. I see the minister would like to have the floor. Minister, the floor is yours.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Indeed, the hillside policy would have regulated those sort of constraints in construction that would have happened in those earlier days. And then on the point of the MP regarding the front side and why, for example, it's so starkly different, particularly in the area of Bellevue, Coal Bay, is, I think, and many people who maybe have land on the front side would know this, there are zones, the front side is zoned. There's areas on the front side which you cannot build housing, it has to remain green, and the area leading into Bellevue is one of those areas as well. So zoning is not something that's completely new or foreign. I think we just have sat down for a very long time on this process, and we can take sort of a lot of lessons learned from the front side in this. We don't have to go very far. They have zoned large parts of their traditionally green areas, traditional little plantation areas, have been zoned as green for several reasons, particularly ecotourism, hiking, wellness, as indicated by the MP, and that's something we can also look into and encourage, because it's not something that's foreign to St. Martin. We're not two different people. We have cousins over there who live in a zoned country. Why can't we live in an equally zoned half of the same island? It's not foreign. So I take that as well as a note that this is something that will be supported, because it's something that we should be all familiar with given that we have the front side doing exactly what we are trying to do here. Yep, that's it for me, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. I now give the floor to MP Utley.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. To the Honorable Minister of ROMI. Minister of ROMI, it's just, I'm offering advice. I think, we should be more, able to offer advice. And I have a document here. It's actually a thesis, a study done by Ruben van Marken in the Netherlands, right? It's a thesis for Master Urban and Transportation Economics. So, and it's done in 2015. The name is Mixed Land Use in the Urban Environment, Exploring the Impact of Physical Diversity on Residential Property, right, in Rotterdam. So I say this, that while we in support of zoning and it's presented, there is the possibility for mixed use. Now, however, it's like you stated, we don't want a garage next to, a specific area. However, knowing that my great-grandfather used to say, one thing God ain't making no more is land. So he ain't making no more land. That's a fact. So knowing the limited land, we have limited resource, and those that do agriculture, I would like for you to look into this document. I will gladly send you the document. One of the parts says, throughout the urban economic and regional science study field, and the idea of spatial mixing functioning is broadly referred to as the concept of mixed land use. So this is something that we can look into, and I bring this up based on a conversation with yourself, through you, Mr. Chair, Honorable Minister, and my colleague, MP La Cruz, on the possibilities of mixed land use and combining certain and specific zonings. So I just want to say, because land is so limited, let's not put everything just in one box, but see how we can functionally make St. Martin more progressive. Thank you, Honorable Minister of ROMI, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, MP Utley. Minister of ROMI, you have the floor.
Yep, just very quickly, completely agree with that sort of comprehensive overview of how you can use mixed use of land in a more comprehensive way. So completely agree with MP Utley's suggestion, and look forward to reading documentation on this thesis.
I look at the speakers list and I see that MP Labega would like to chime in. MP Labega, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon to the Minister and his support staff. Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the Minister, with the weather that we've seen the last couple of months, we've seen a lot of retaining walls that have fallen over. I'm sure a lot more have weakened. Is there plans to do more checks or have people that are building adhere to stricter regulations? What's your take on this? Because we see where the weather is going, and it's only going to get stronger and stronger. And I know a lot of times people request building permits and they build outside of the permit, and when you have certain things happen, who's to blame? What's to happen? So I think it'll be very good to do additional check for the building of new retaining walls to strengthen them, because obviously when those things happen, it affects everybody underneath when the retaining wall falls. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Labega. I give the floor back to the Minister. Minister, the floor is yours.
Oh, it's on. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Indeed, it's two things. I think it's a question of reinforcing again the need for civil works permits, because a lot of people, what they do in practice is that they excavate their property, they level it off, and then they come to VROMI for a building permit. And oftentimes that sort of knowledge on how to properly cut, or how to cut, I think cutting, people not to cut, but people are aiming to cut in the most cost-efficient way versus cutting to find a balance in how it should be done properly. So that's why VROMI has to come in the civil works permit, because before you can cut, you have to kind of figure out, okay, well, take into consideration your neighbor, which most people wouldn't do when they're constructing. This is a natural waterway, so we have to put a drainage there, we have to do some XYZ. These are all considerations as to why we have to really reinforce the civil works permits. Secondly, it comes to an idea of And with that, you'd also get information on how you have to build a retaining wall. I've come across several properties in the last couple of months that, one, they were allowed to be built without retaining walls. They don't have any. Some of them don't have the right amount of height because you can cut into a hill if your retaining wall is too low or too short. That doesn't really serve the purpose. And secondly, it boils down to the age-old challenge of government, which is capacity. And once we have to also remember that and it goes back again, and it's all sort of cyclical. It goes back to the idea of I can send 10 of my inspectors out to write warning letters. If they can't issue a fine, it falls on deaf ears. I have several removal orders pending as well for structures that have been built. And if they're not removed, it just kind of stays there unless CVROMI goes and physically does it themselves to remove the truck. So again, it goes back to how do we reinforce this? It's enforcing civil works permits, but also enforcing that administrative enforcement. Because the minute I hit you with a fine, not a 50 guineas, but we're also going to address that as well in the National Ordinance implementation, you have to also have a list of fines equated and equal to the action. So also looking at how we review fines, because if you're going to fine me 500 guilders for retaining wall infraction, I mean, that's a couple of bricks out of the whole retaining wall. So it doesn't really serve the purpose if you're fining me 50 guilders, 500 guilders. We have to kind of make it hit home that this is no longer allowed, because trust me, one 5,000 guilder fine will stop somebody really quickly than just a letter signed by me who they have no clue who I even am. So that's kind of how we have to look at reinforcement, civil works permits, and also the capacity, and using capacity efficiently by implementation of that national ordinance as well.
Thank you. Minister, I look at the members to see if there are any more questions. No? Well, then I'll pose my questions in the meantime. Minister, thank you for your presentation. It was very clear. I just have a couple questions as it pertains to clarification on a couple of things and a couple of new things. I saw a whole plan from Q1 this year going into Q2 of 2026. Does that encompass the zoning of St. Martin or the steps towards zoning of St. Martin? With that being said, zoning, is it also going to be taken into a more broader sense as an interministerial with TEAT? And how deep, how extensive will that be, and how would that look like? And how does that, the pending zoning or the pending preparatory resolutions, how does that affect the current requests right now that lay in CVROMI as well as in TEAT? The minister also alluded to civil works permits, making that the new gold standard as it pertains to everything hillside. My question would be, as MP Wescot-Williams alluded to, back in the day you would have more stricter regulations as it pertains to excavation. So I would assume the excavation plan would also have to be part of the civil work permit. How extensive is that going to be? Because I don't know who referenced it, I think the minister himself referenced it, that cost-cutting measures are taking nowadays when contractors with owners would excavate their land. Cost-cutting when it pertains to the erecting of the building and maybe the excavation cost of the land, but not as it pertains to, for example, constructing of the retaining wall. Because in a lot of areas, you would say people do the quick one cut, and then you have a retaining wall of 10 meters or whatever. And whereas if they had cut the land in stages, you would have a retaining wall of a mere 6 feet, for example. So my question is, how extensive will those excavation plan limitations be? And by when can we expect such a permit being required? Also, I also like to make note of the work done in Bishop Hill. The road smooth and they have lines again. So I thank the minister for that. But I would like to ask the minister if, along with the ministry, if they would like to take a keener look before implementing certain traffic measures, such as traffic islands at intersections, because they have certain intersections used on the island, Bishop Hill being one of them, where you have the freight trucks going towards the front side, whereas now that the island is there, it's great for the cars, but now the freight trucks would have an issue making that turn. And, you know, vis-a-vis, it's a chain reaction. They have problems making the turn, it becomes a traffic hazard, and it can actually cost from your money because now you have to go and repair an island in a couple of weeks to months' time. So I would like to know if the ministry is looking into a kind of a traffic study to see what we have, what we're missing, and what is needed for that particular situation, right? Also, speaking about situations, intensity reports. That's the first time I used the word towards the minister. Intensity reports as it pertains to traffic, right? So currently, I think the minister has recently requested a traffic study to be done, and there will be more traffic studies requested in the future. But in between studies, in between the need for these studies, is the ministry looking into doing periodical intensity reports, intensity studies. That is something you don't need a elaborate third party to do. It's a question of just buying the machines. I remember CVROMI back in the day had those machines. So is the ministry looking into intensity reports? Because all the urban ideas brought up today, intensity reports would already give the ministry a step forward before even seeing one of those traffic reports as to if it would be needed or would it be effective. In closing, MP Utley touched on it lightly. The assessment plan, or assessment report, was there an assessment report done after the recent flooding slash, I would say, heavy weather in November? And with assessment reports, also zooming into the affected areas, also people. Does the ministry have a list of how many homes were flooded? Does the ministry have an overview of all the damages done to the infrastructure, and how does that translate into money, right? So that this heavy rainfall cost the country X amount of funds. Because in order to know where we're going, we got to know where we're coming from. And if we're going to be comparing moving forward, are all these mitigation measures, what's the return on investment for all of these mitigation measures? That would be basically based on the assessments done after heavy rainfall, after these calamities. Also, I didn't really get a more in. I saw that there was a table. Honestly, I didn't get any time to go through the table as yet, but I don't think that included the CapEx expenditures. And how does the CapEx expenditures relate to the subjects we spoke about today, right? So I know in the minister's presentation during the budget, he alluded to the list of projects, but I would like to know in relation to the topic spoken on today, how much money is being allocated into dealing with these issues. And lastly, as it pertains to the hills and the problems in the hills, particularly the hillside policy, and in particular retaining walls, there are dozens and dozens and dozens of landowners who, when they got their permit to construct their property, a retaining wall was not needed or not necessary at the time. And because of climate change, because of erosion, or because of increased construction in the hills, or a neighbor not doing what they're supposed to do, they are now placed in a scenario and a situation where a retaining wall is now needed. What does the ministry have planned to help these landowners that are in need? Because a retaining wall is not $5. So what does the ministry have planned? I know it's not imminent, but what is the ministry working on to help these landowners that are in these peculiar positions? Because to go from not needing a retaining wall to having to spend $50,000 on one, if you're lucky, that's a major undertaking. So what does the ministry have planned for that? And the minister spoke on fines. Also, what does the ministry have planned for those who bring, I would say, put others in peculiar positions that cost them money? So are the fines related to helping the person with their new situation? Like if you put me in a situation where I need a retaining wall now, is it directly funds related, or is it then also project related, as the minister alluded to, making it more situation based? So that would be it for my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I can just request 5 minutes to tidy up the notes in my head with my team, that'd be much appreciated.
Yes, the minister has indicated he needs time to caucus with his staff, so I'll be hereby adjourning the meeting for about 5 to... Minister, how much time do you think you will need? 5 minutes? I hereby adjourn the meeting for 5 minutes. Once again, good afternoon to the Minister. I hereby reconvene this meeting. Minister, you were just about to answer the questions posed prior to adjourning the meeting. Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Regarding your question on the zoning plan, is this timeline for zoning plan, the entire zoning plan? Indeed, from conception until realization in Parliament. The idea is that this very ambitiously will be here by the end of, well, I think it was June 2026, summer 2026, mid-2026. Interministerial with TEAT, indeed, it's exactly why we, I think this meeting was joint, simply because it depends on how we zone the land, what TEAT can allow to have happen in terms of economics. So it is very much interministerial, very much in line, and we're very much in discussion with each other on how we realize this plan, given that it will indefinitely impact TEAT in the economic activities of the country. Your question on resolutions that these property resolutions, will they impact any current requests? Indeed, it's one of the reasons why in giving support to the motion in October, I indicated that one, this will also impact what is privately held land, as well as at times, and we've gone through the list kind of already approved projects, some approved for over 10 to 15 years already. It will be impacted if we do the property resolutions toward the zoning long-term plan. Excavation plan. Okay, your question, excavation plan, is it in the civil works permit? Indeed, there is a list within the civil works permits that exist, but I think there is indeed room for improvement because the current list for approval is quite limited in terms of its scope of what it asks for. So I think in terms of things like the step back, how far you're allowed to go into the hill, there's definitely room for improvement in that list when it comes to civil works permits. So point taken, and we will revise it as part of our ongoing efforts to improve our services. In your question regarding cutting as well, agreed, and I think it goes back to why it's so important. People cut the land the most economical way, which is one single cut, whereas, as you indicated, cutting, so more terracing can be a way to actually mitigate possible erosion. We also see it in people who have land in hills, that they will cut one straight road up to the hill instead of doing the S-shaping of the road. And very interestingly, the cause and damage of that we saw in the area, Madam Estate, where one of the retaining walls came down. Several factors, one of which, of course, was the sort of the deluge of water coming down that road that fast. Then we have your question regarding Bishop Hill traffic islands, and indeed, I think one of the things, and I think it's been going around social media quite a bit, that the ministry had put an island in the center of the road, which caused some troubles for the buses and the bigger trucks. Important to note is that when that island was made, it was actually, the road had not been resurfaced as yet. Thus, when the truck passed, and you can see in the picture, it was still under construction with the barricades around it, it was fully exposed compared to what is now today exposed. So there's relatively a smooth surface, which the trucks have to go over and they can go over. And the rationale for putting in that island was the following. There's oftentimes a lot of cars that don't necessarily see, that sort of turn in there relatively fast. They cause accidents. And the idea was to try and mitigate and properly delineate where that divide is. The question, of course, is that can be done with lines as well, but it's also a question of slowing down traffic that comes that way. With the pouring of asphalt on that area now, I was there last night just to verify as well, the traffic island is indeed relatively smooth to the road. There is, of course, areas where the bricks are meant to slow down traffic, but I don't necessarily foresee it being a problem, but we will, of course, look into the effects of this more long-term, given one that whatever evidence we have now is before it was actually completed, and now it's completed, we will see how the impact of it is, of course, to big trucks, because those considerations were discussed and taken into consideration, of course, but that's exactly why we made a relatively flush island to the road to avoid such incidences from happening. And of course, your question on study, yes, indeed, UNOPS is going to be involved in this. It's an interministerial collaboration with Justice and TIAT. There's a letter of intent that has to be signed, as I said before, and the cost we will know when we get the full evaluation. So the initial study is for free, and then, of course, for the full entire implementation of the study, that will then have a cost. Intensity reports. Great idea. I think the last time we did intensity study report was when we were building the causeway and related links. So that's quite some time ago. I think that's something we can definitely use in sort of taking more swift responses to very isolated incidences in the country and how that impacts our congestion. So something we can definitely use more going forward instead of waiting for quite a long study to take place to tell us exactly what we kind of already know. Then assessment report after heavy rains, areas and people. How many homes were flooded? There was not a comprehensive report done regarding the complete impact of the rain. What was done by the Ministry of ROMI was an assessment of the undermined roads. There's an assessment of the roads that were damaged and as well as all the walls that were damaged. There is an advice coming out very shortly regarding how to tackle the undermined roads. But again, I think in terms of a comprehensive disaster report, that would have to then consult with my colleague minister, the Minister of AZ, who's over the entirety of disasters. But again, this rain wasn't declared a disaster appointed by the country, so then it will still fall on me to kind of address the areas which I have mandate over, and I think we are doing that quite shortly on how to address the areas of the roads, etc. CapEx expenditures. Yes, again, in the budget debate, I spoke about the need to have the allocation, the focus on drainage, and I think I spoke just very briefly, though, on my intentions to reallocate CapEx towards drainage and mitigation efforts, one of which, of course, was the fact that I don't think we need a boat as a ministry. We have a SLA with Nature Foundation who has a boat, and we have the Coast Guard. So the reallocation of those funds. I'm also looking at other elements as well within the CapEx, which I promised to bring back to the Amendment 2025 in May. So with your indulgence, Mr. Chair, I will give more elucidation on that as we go on in the year. Retaining walls not needed at time, people who cut, yes. Regarding your question about who has to actually pay, and I think something we've been reviewing the 5-minute break actually. We'd like to come back with you on that because there are some conflicting ideas of who's responsible. Is it the person who comes in and does the cutting, or is it a joint initiative of both landowners? So we have to review that with our legal team and then get back to you in writing on that as soon as possible. Then we have one last question from you regarding fines. How does it help the person who is actually, being victimized or a victim of? The fines themselves could be used as an idea to create sort of a victim fund, but initially a fine is not necessarily to compensate the person who has been victimized. It's really to kind of, one, curb an offense, and also to help support government or whoever is the collector of these fines in terms of execution of its mandate. When it comes to disputes and fines and who is right and who is wrong in a sort of confrontation, it does not fall to the Ministry of ROMI per se, and that's a challenge now you have, that ROMI approves something that didn't cause a problem, but it does go towards the civil domain, so it has to be between the two people who are in dispute with the courts. These are one of the challenges we have now, particularly when it comes to the area of cul-de-sac, where permits were approved for construction. The report from Acrobatic X tells us, well, these are the challenges as to why this erosion happened and the drainage issues, but it has to be referred to the civil court. But intrinsically, we see that government as well had a role to play in this happening. So from our side, what we are going to do is, again, going back to before it gets to that problem, how do we enforce our rules better to mitigate government's role, government's liability, and then everything else has to be handled by the court system. And with that, Mr. Chair, I think I've covered all your questions, and I will return, of course, on the issue of the retaining walls and where the liability falls with who does what in construction.
Thank you, Minister. Minister, I have 2 quick points of clarification. As it pertains to the protection of the ponds, you gave the ministry gave a point of approach between now and Q2. That also includes public consultations for private land, etc., for public participation. But does the protection of the ponds fall within that scope, or is that a separate scope, seeing that I think public participation will be on a lesser scale than in comparison to the buildable areas? So that would be my question on that. And going a bit further in on the point of excavation, the retaining walls, I also asked, does the ministry plan on implementing any type of, for lack of a better word, subsidy for people that find themselves in situations that they cannot afford, but they are prone to major damage in the event of heavy rainfall? So, for example, does the ministry plan on CapEx 2025 or 2026 to allocate funds specifically, like how in this case it was for road resurfacing, and that in the next case would be for retaining wall fund or whatever you would want to call it at that point? So those would just be my 2 points of clarification, please. Thank you.
Oh, no. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very quickly on your timeline, is a separate timeline for the preparatory resolutions. Indeed, this timeline as presented has to do with the overall zoning, but of course, in consultation for the resolutions to have them to happen, that timeline will indeed overlap, because someone would have already been informed of the plan to zone in preparation of the bigger zoning timeline. So even though it's 2 separate trajectories that support each other, the consultation done in this resolutions phase can be used toward the final zoning phase. So we will actually have save time in this process overall as well. So it's 2 separate trajectories, but the consultation will help in the zoning consultations as well. Yes, in cases where it involves people who have either existing building permits or is privately owned land. Yeah. And then your plan on implementing a fund, and I think this is where in tomorrow's discussion with the Development Foundation, the question would then be, how do you allocate the funding that would be given from the investments, from the investors, towards what would it be used for? And it can be used for, like I said, environmental nature interventions, educational healthcare has to be determined, but of course, the Environmental Impact Fund wouldn't necessitate it goes as a first priority towards mitigating things like this. So of course, those parameters will be worked out in the coming days, and I'll share that with you as well. But I very much like the idea of some kind of fund that supports people who can't afford, because a lot of people have homes that once the mortgage is done, they don't do insurance on them anymore. And it becomes a problem where in times of things like this, they can't afford to actually fix the problem. And with that, I end my comments.
Thank you, Minister of CVROMI. And I think, looking at the members, I think that brings us to the end of this agenda point and also this meeting. So I would like to thank the Minister and his support staff for their indulgence and spending some time with us this afternoon. Also the members of the committee for taking part in the meeting. And I would like to hereby close this agenda point and meeting.